Welcome back to the quiet apothecary. Take a slow breath, settle into where you are, and let the shoulders drop a little. There is no hurry tonight, and nothing here that asks anything of you. Tonight we are going to walk together through the wards of a medieval hospital. The year is 1380. The place is the Hôtel-Dieu of Paris, the great old hospital on the Bois de la Cité, set in the long shadow of the Cathedral of Notre Dame. The summer is drawing toward its quiet close, and the late evening has settled upon the city like a soft grey wool. The bells of Vespers have rung an hour ago, and the lamps along the wards have been lit, one, by the lay sisters of the order. Imagine, for a moment, what it would be to come gently through the great oak door of such a place. A small lay novice has unbarred the inner door for you, and you step into the long wide hall called the Salle Saint Thomas, the Hall of Saint Thomas. The air smells of warm beeswax, of dried lavender, of the slow steam of an oat broth simmering somewhere out of sight, and underneath all of these, of the clean linen sheets that were boiled this morning in the laundry by the river. The wooden floors creak softly under the soles of the night, Sister's leather shoes as she begins her rounds, and we will follow at her quiet heel. We will count 100 items together, 100 small and ordinary things found within these walls, told one at a time, each in its quiet turn. We will begin with the simplest furnishings of the ward, the straw beds and the wool blankets that any peasant in the city outside would know by sight. We will move slowly outward from there, through the careful tools of the chirurgeon laid out upon a folded cloth, into the high painted jars of the apothecary cupboards, into the dried herbs that hang from the rafters of the dispensary, and through the small chapel set at the end of the ward where a single candle keeps watch. We will pass through the kitchen, where the diet of the convalescent is being prepared, into the linen room where the great cauldrons of the laundry are still warm, into the writing room of the master, where the ledgers stand bound in calf skin, and at the last we will come to the small bare room set aside for the careful comforts of the dying. That is the pace I would like to keep tonight. Slow, even, steady as a soft rain upon an old slate roof. There is no test at the end. There are no facts to remember. The only thing that matters is the quiet. Before we turn to the first item, let us take a few minutes to sit at the threshold and understand a little of where we are. For the medieval hospital was not the modern hospital. It was something else. Something quieter, slower, simpler, and at the same time much more ambitious in its quiet way. In the year 1380, the city of Paris held perhaps 200,000 souls within its walls, making it one of the largest cities in Christendom. Its population had been thinned by the great pestilence of 1348, and again by the secondary waves of plague that returned with sad regularity through the rest of the century. But the city had endured. The sign ran black with the night, soil of a great town. The bells of 200 parishes rang the hours, and the long traffic of pilgrims, students, merchants, and beggars moved along its narrow streets. Among them there were always the sick of body, the sick of mind, the very old, the very young, the abandoned, the dying. For these, the city had its hospitals. The Hôtel-Dieu, where we stand tonight, was the oldest. It had been founded in the 7th century by Saint Landry, a bishop of Paris of the Merovingian age, as a small almshouse and hostel for the poor and the pilgrim. It had grown slowly, century by century, into the great institution that we see now. By 1380 it occupied a long range of stone buildings on the south bank of the island, with its eastern wall almost touching the river and its main gate facing the open square before the cathedral. It had wards for men and wards for women, separate from one another. It had a chapel, a kitchen, a laundry, a writing room, a dispensary, a small physic garden along the river wall, and a cemetery just beyond the eastern gate. What the medieval hospital was, and what it was not, is worth taking a moment to understand. It was not a place that aimed, above all things, to cure. The medical learning of the age was real, and we shall meet it in time, but the hospital had not been built around it. The hospital had been built around the 7 corporal works of mercy set out by the Gospel of St. Matthew. To feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to shelter the stranger, to visit the sick, to ransom the captive, to bury the dead. Of these 7, the hospital practiced 6 within its walls every single day. It fed and watered the poor. It clothed those who came in rags. It sheltered the pilgrim and the stranger. It cared for the sick, and in its small cemetery beyond the wall, it buried the dead with a Christian rite. The orders that ran the hospitals were religious, almost without exception. The Hôtel-Dieu of Paris was staffed by the Augustinian sisters, the famous Filles-Dieu of the city, women in white veils and grey habits, who had taken vows of poverty, chastity and obedience, and had given the rest of their lives over to the slow daily work of the wards. There were perhaps 50 of them in residence in any given season, with a smaller number of lay brothers who did the heavier physical work. There was a master, who was both administrator and senior physician, and a small number of visiting physicians and chirurgeons from the schools of Paris who attended in turn. There was a chaplain, an almoner, a sacristan, a cook, a baker, a laundress, and a great number of unnamed novices and lay helpers who came and went in the long, quiet shadow of the wards. The day in such a place was set out by the bells. Before dawn, the sisters rose for the office of matins. After matins came lauds, then the small breaking of bread, and then the first round of the wards. The sick were washed where washing was needed. The night soil was carried out to the river. The fires of the kitchen were laid. The breakfast porridge was set to cook in great cauldrons. By the 3rd hour of the morning, the wards had been swept, the linen changed, the bedpans emptied, and the master physician was making his slow circuit, attended by a young clerk with a wax tablet, listening to the night sister's account of how each patient had passed the night. The chirurgeon did his work in the late morning, when the daylight through the high windows was at its best for the careful eye. The midday meal was served in 2 seatings, the strong patients eating sitting up, the weaker patients fed by hand by the sisters. The afternoon was for rest, for visits from family, for the slow visit of the chaplain to those who had asked for the sacraments. The evening meal was lighter, more often a thin broth than a stew. The candles were lit at vespers. The night office of Compline was sung in the chapel by the sisters who were not on watch. Then the great oak doors were barred for the night, and the night sister began the long, quiet, candle-lit round that we have just joined. A patient might stay in the hospital for a single night, in which case they were treated rather as a pilgrim than as a sick person, given a bed and a meal and a blessing. or they might stay for a few days, recovering from a fever or a small wound. Or they might stay for weeks, recovering from a difficult illness or a mending bone. Or they might stay until the end of their lives, if they had no place else to go and no one in the world to whom they belonged. Many of those who stayed longest were old men and women who had outlived their families, or pilgrims taken ill on the road who had no means to return, or wounded soldiers from the long wars in the south. They became, in the slow way of such places, a small community of the kept and the cared for, with their own corners of the wards and their own small habits and the quiet, patient affection of the sisters who had known them now for many years. That is the place we are walking in tonight. That is the rhythm of the days that have led to this evening. Now we will begin the slow count of 100 things, each in its turn. The first is the Great Ward, the Salle Saint Thomas itself. It is a long, high stone hall, more than 200 feet from end to end, with a vaulted wooden ceiling held up by great oak beams that have been blackened by the slow smoke of 2 centuries of candles. The walls are of pale limestone, plastered smooth and washed each year with a fresh coat of pale lime, so that the upper walls have a soft chalk, white glow that catches the lamplight gently. Tall, narrow windows are cut high into the walls, set deep into the stone, glazed with small pieces of pale leaded glass. By day they let in a soft, even light from above. By this hour of the evening they have grown dark, and the only light in the ward comes from the small lamps set at intervals along the central aisle. The hall is broken into bays by stone arches. In each bay are set the beds, in 2 rows along either wall, the heads against the stone, the feet pointing inward to the central aisle. There are perhaps 100 beds in this single hall, and there are 3 other such halls in the building. The aisle between the beds is wide enough for 2 sisters to pass with a tray. At the far end of the hall, a small chapel is set, its altar visible through a wide arched opening, with a single candle of pure beeswax burning slowly upon the stone of the altar. The chapel is the eastern end of the hall. The sick lie facing east, that they may, at the rising of each new day, see the light of the chapel candle. There is a soft sound in this hall that you do not hear in any modern building. It is the sound of perhaps 200 sleeping people, breathing slowly, in and out, in the long uneven rhythm of human sleep. Some snore softly, some murmur, some shift in their straw mattresses. Beneath these small sounds is the slow tick of the great wall clock recently installed at the master's order, and beneath that, the very faint hum of the river outside, where the long water of the Seine moves quietly past the foundations of the building. It is, altogether, a quieter and more living sound than any silence. The second is the straw mattress. Each bed in the hall is laid first with a long sack of coarse linen, sewn down its long edges and across each end, stuffed thickly with fresh oat straw from the great barns of the hospital's farms in the country to the north. The straw is changed twice a year, in the spring and again in the late autumn, and the old straw is taken to the gardens to be turned into the soil. The new straw, when it has just been laid, has a clean, sweet, faintly grassy smell, like the smell of an old hay barn in summer. The straw mattress is the foundation of every bed in every hospital of medieval Christendom. It is the simplest and the cheapest of all soft surfaces. It costs almost nothing, for the straw is the by-product of the bread that the hospital eats. It can be replaced in an hour. It is light enough for the lay brothers to carry on a single shoulder. It can be burned in case of a contagious death without any great loss. And it is warm. The thick layer of straw between the patient and the cold stone floor is the first wall against the long French winter. Atop the straw mattress is laid a second, smaller mattress of carded wool, sewn into a linen cover, which gives the bed its softness. The patient does not feel the straw at all. He feels only the wool and the smooth linen sheet that lies above it. The straw is good in another way as well. It draws away the small, unkind dampness of long lying. The fresh straw is light and airy, and the old country wisdom held that it kept the body honest. The sisters of the Hôtel-Dieu, like the sisters of every other house, knew the straw mattress as one of their constant cares. The third is the shared bed. It is one of the things that strangers from later centuries sometimes find difficult to imagine, but in a medieval hospital the beds are not always for one person at a time. The Hôtel-Dieu of Paris, in the year 1380, has perhaps 350 patients in its 4 halls on any given night, and only 240 bedsteads. In times of plague, in famine years, after the bad floods, that ratio worsens. The beds, therefore, are sometimes shared between 2 patients, lying head to foot, and in the very worst seasons, even 3 to a bed. The sisters did their careful best to pair the patients well. A man with a broken leg would be set with a man recovering from a fever, on the principle that one would not disturb the other. A young woman with a small wound would be set with an older woman with a chest cold. A pilgrim taken ill on the road would be set with another pilgrim. The sisters kept a careful eye, in their nightly rounds, that the pairings were not unkind. If a patient grew worse, the sister on watch would move him gently to a single bed in the small fever ward at the eastern end of the hall, that his neighbor might rest more easily. The shared bed has, in our minds, a sad sound to it, but in the lived experience of the medieval ward, it was very often a comfort. To lie alone in pain in a strange place is one of the loneliest things a body can do. To lie beside another quiet sleeping body, to feel the small warmth of another human being beside one in the dark, to hear another's slow breathing in the long hours, was to most of the patients of the wards a quiet kindness, rather than a hardship. The fourth is the wool blanket. It is a long, heavy rectangle of carded sheep's wool, woven on a wide loom, finished at its edges with a simple binding of plain linen tape. The wool is dyed nothing at all. It is the soft natural white of the undyed Cotswold fleece, or the soft brown of the local Picardy sheep, or the soft grey of the wool that comes south by river from the Flemish flocks. The blanket measures about 6 feet by 4, and weighs perhaps 4 pounds, and lies heavily and warmly upon the patient. The wool blanket of the medieval hospital has done long faithful service, for the wool is durable and forgiving, and a well-made blanket may be in use for 15 or even 20 years before it is finally retired to the lower stocks. The blankets are washed by the laundry at intervals, soaked in the great wooden tubs of the lavage by the river, beaten with wooden paddles, rinsed in the cold running water, and laid out to dry upon the long stone walls of the hospital garden in the long days of summer. By the time a blanket has been washed 20 times, it has become wonderfully soft, and the small woolen filaments have matted into a kind of dense felt that holds heat very well. Old blankets, in the language of the laundry sisters, are called the warmest blankets. They are saved especially for the elderly and for the very young, and for those whose long fevers leave them shivering in the long nights. A patient who has been at the hospital for some weeks will come to know his particular blanket. He will know its small marks, its little frayed corner, its slightly thinner patch in the middle, the place where the wool has gone soft from his own body's lying upon it. The sisters do not always keep the blankets paired with the patients, but where they can, they do, for the small comforts of long sickness. To be tucked in beneath one's own blanket, in one's own corner of the long ward, is a small kindness that many of the long stayers come to depend upon. The fifth is the wooden bedstead. The frame beneath the mattress is made of stout pine, sometimes oak, with 4 short legs raising the bed perhaps 8 inches off the cold stone floor. The legs are joined to the side rails by simple mortise and tenon joints, pegged with hardwood pegs rather than nailed, for the sisters keep the beds in repair themselves, and a peg joint can be eased apart and pegged with no loss. Across the side rails is laced a tight grid of hempen rope, drawn through holes in the rails by the hospital carpenter when the bed is built, and tightened from time to time with a small wooden bed key as the rope softens with use. The straw sack lies upon the rope, the wool mattress lies upon the straw. The patient lies upon the wool. There are no headboards, no footboards, no curtains, no canopies. The medieval hospital bed is the most plain and honest of objects. It is built to last, to be cleaned, to be moved if needed, and to do nothing else. It carries no decoration. It bears no carving. The bedsteads of the long ward are nearly identical to one another, and they have stood in their places for a very long time. Many of the beds in the Salle Saint Thomas were built by the carpenter Jean of Senlis, who set up his workshop in the hospital courtyard in the years after the Great Plague, when many new beds were needed, and built nearly 200 of them in a single span of 3 years. Jean of Senlis is long dead. His beds are still here, mended a dozen times, the wood darkened by long use, the rope replaced perhaps 4 times over, but the frame still sound, the joints still tight. The sixth is the cathedra of the master physician. At the center of the hall, set just before the chapel arch, is a single high, backed wooden chair. It is the chair of the master, the Magister Medicinae, the senior physician of the hospital. It is a tall, straight, backed chair of dark oak, with a simple low canopy carved above the headrest, the only piece of carved decoration in the whole of the long hall. A small cushion of red wool is laid upon the seat. To either side of the chair is a small reading stand, on which the master's book of cases is set when he is in his rounds. The cathedra is occupied for perhaps 2 hours in the morning, when the master makes his rounds, and again for an hour after the midday meal, when he sits and listens to the reports of the chirurgeons and the visiting physicians. For the rest of the day it stands empty, like a little throne, with the red cushion bright against the dark wood, and the soft, chalky white of the wall behind. To the patients of the long ward, the cathedra is a kind of reassurance. It says, even when it is empty, that the master is somewhere within these walls, that his thought is still attending the place, and that in the morning he will come again with his quiet, practiced step, and bend his head to ask how the night has gone. The master in this year is Master Jin Patat, a physician trained at the School of Montpellier, now in his 53rd year, with a long, quiet face and a slow, careful manner of speech. He has held the post for 12 years. He will hold it for 9 more before he retires to a small canonry at Notre Dame and is replaced by a younger man, Master Guillaume of Reims. The cathedral will hold them both in their turn, and a good many other masters before and after them, for the chair has stood here in one form or another since the year 1217. The 7th is the reading desk. Set against the wall beside the cathedral is a small wooden lectern, perhaps 4 feet high, with a slanted top of dark wood and a small ledge at the bottom to keep a heavy book from sliding off. Upon this lectern, by day, lies open the great house copy of the Antidotarium Nicolai, the standard pharmacopoeia of the hospitals of medieval France, written in the early 12th century at the medical school of Salerno and copied out in nearly every hospital of Latin Christendom. The H.T. Dieu's copy was made in 1342 by a clerk of the chapter of Notre Dame on parchment of fine calf skin, bound in plain dark leather over wooden boards. The desk is open to whatever page the master has last consulted. There are many pages. The book lists, in alphabetical order, the standard preparations of the apothecary trade, with their ingredients, their proportions, their methods of preparation, and their prescribed uses. The candle that lights the page in the long evenings is kept on a little iron pricket fixed to the side of the desk, so that no spark may fall upon the open page, and the lay novice on duty has the small careful task of trimming the wick every half hour and watching that the candle does not gutter. The book has stood upon this desk through many quiet midnights. Many sisters and many novices have stood and read of the preparations, slowly, with the candle close to the page, the long quiet ward sleeping behind them. The 8th is the wax candle on the iron stand. At intervals along the central aisle of the hall, perhaps every 12 feet, an iron stand has been set into the floor. Each stand is a slender black iron rod, perhaps 4 feet high, with a small flat round dish at its top to catch the drippings, and a sharp iron pricket above the dish upon which a single great candle of pure beeswax is set. The candles are made in the candle room of the hospital by an old lay brother named Brother Gills, who has done this work for 30 years. He keeps a great copper kettle for the melting of the wax, and a long string of cotton wicks suspended above the kettle, and once a week he dips and dips them until the candles have grown to the proper thickness. The candles burn slowly through the night. A single candle of this size, properly trimmed, will give a soft golden light for nearly 12 hours before it gutters down. Their light is nothing like the white, sharp electric light of a modern hospital. It is a slow, low, golden orange light, and it falls in soft pools at the foot of each iron stand, leaving the upper reaches of the long vaulted ceiling in a deep warm shadow. The light makes the long ward feel small and gentle, even though it is in fact very large. The face of a sleeping patient, lit by the candle, is softened into something almost like a Flemish painting. The candle is tended by the night sister, who passes from stand to stand and trims the wick with a small pair of brass snuffers. She moves so quietly in her rope-soled shoes that she does not wake even the lightest sleepers. The 9th is the bell of the night watch. Near the cathedra, hung from a small wrought iron bracket fixed into the stone of the wall, is a single small brass bell no larger than the bowl of a child's hand. From its clapper hangs a slender strip of plain linen ribbon. The bell is not rung in the ordinary course of the night. It is rung only when the sister on watch needs the help of a second sister, in a sudden case, in a death, in a delivery, in a fever turning very fast in the night. 3 rings of the bell, in steady, slow succession, will bring the second sister from the small room at the end of the hall where she sits at her own watch. In the long majority of nights, the bell is silent. Many nights pass, week after week, without its slender voice being heard at all. But its presence on the wall is one of the small, constant comforts of the hall. The patients know it is there. The sister on watch knows it is there. If the small, terrible moment comes, it will be answered. The brass of the bell has been polished by the hands of perhaps 30 sisters across the years, and the polished part is bright in the candle light. The unpolished part, deep within the bowl of the bell, is the soft brown patina of long quiet age. The 10th is the footstool. At the foot of the Master's cathedra stands a small carved wooden footstool, perhaps 1.5 feet square, no more than 9 inches high, with a thick cushion of red wool upon its top. It is the footstool of the Master Physician. He rests his feet upon it as he sits in the cathedra, and as the morning rounds wear on. The small comfort of the footstool is no small thing to a man who must stand and bend and stand again at the bedside of perhaps 100 patients in a single morning. The footstool is a humble, small object, but it has its small, quiet history as well. It was given to the hospital as a bequest in the year 1320 by the widow of a Parisian wool merchant who had been treated kindly here at the close of his life. She had it made by her own household carpenter and sent it down to the hospital with a small note asking only that it be kept by the Master's chair. The note has long been lost, but the footstool is still here. It has been cushioned a dozen times. The dark oak of its frame has darkened further with the rubbing of leather shoes. But the small, slender history of the gift remains in the quiet records of the chapter, and the Master who sits in the cathedra each morning rests his feet upon the gift of a wool merchant's widow 6.5 decades dead. We have, in this slow round, walked past 10 of the simplest furnishings of the great ward. We will move now to the second small group, the tools of the chirurgeon, kept on a folded cloth on a small table at the side of the Master's cathedra. The 11th is the lancet. It is a small, slender blade of polished steel, perhaps 3 inches long, fitted with a narrow ivory handle. The blade is cut to a single sharp point, with 2 long fine cutting edges, and it has been honed to a keenness that will part the skin with the lightest touch. It is the simplest tool of the chirurgeon, and the most often used. It is the lancet that opens the small abscess, that draws the splinter, that takes the few drops of blood for the testing. The lancet is kept wrapped in a small piece of fine linen, in a flat wooden case lined with red velvet. Beside it lie 2 or 3 other lancets of slightly different size, for different works. The lancets are sharpened each week upon a small whetstone of grey slate kept in a leather pouch, and the Master himself does this sharpening, for he will not trust the lancet to any other hand. He is particular about his lancets. He has a favourite among them, a Toledo steel lancet given him by his old teacher at Montpellier, and that lancet does the most delicate of his works. The lancet is the meeting of human flesh and human steel. It is the most personal of all the chirurgeon's tools, and is kept in the most careful order. The 12th is the phleem for bleeding. The phleem is the larger relative of the lancet, made for the deliberate practice of phlebotomy, the bloodletting that was the central act of much medieval medicine. It is a small triangular blade of steel, perhaps an inch long, set sideways into a bone or wooden handle, so that the cutting edge stands at a right angle to the haft. The chirurgeon places the phleem against the swollen vein at the inside of the elbow, holds a small wooden mallet in his other hand, and gives the back of the phleem a single quick tap, opening the vein with one small sure stroke. The blood is caught in a pewter basin held below. The phleem, in the standard medieval medicine, was used several times a year by most patients of any standing, and in the hospital it was used for those whose fevers, swellings, or melancholy were judged to come from an excess of blood. A standard bleeding drew perhaps 8 ounces, a small amount carefully measured in the pewter basin. The patient would lie quiet. The basin would be emptied. The small wound would be closed with a strip of clean linen, and the patient would rest for the remainder of the day with a cup of warm broth and a quiet prayer. The phleem in the hospital's case is plain and worn, the blade sharpened many times across many years, the bone of the handle stained a soft brown from long handling. There are 3 phleems in the case, of 3 different sizes, for 3 different scales of vein, and the chirurgeon chooses among them with care. The smallest of the 3 is reserved for women and for children, that the cut may be slight. The 13th is the cupping glass. The cupping glass is a small, thick, walled vessel of pale blown glass, shaped like a little bell, perhaps 2 inches across at its mouth, with a smooth, rounded bottom and a small, flat base. It is one of the oldest tools of the medical art, used by the Greeks, by the Romans, by the Arab physicians of Cordoba and Baghdad, and by the medieval physicians who learned from them. The use is this. A small piece of cotton tow is soaked in oil, set into the cup, and lit with a small taper. The cup is then placed quickly, mouth down, against the skin of the patient. The flame inside the cup, deprived of fresh air, goes out in a moment, and the cooling air within the cup contracts, drawing the skin gently up into the bell of the cup. The cup is left in place for some minutes. When it is lifted away, a soft round red mark remains upon the skin, where the blood has been drawn near the surface. In the medieval hospital, the cupping glass was used for the treatment of stiff and cold limbs, for the relief of long, standing pains in the back and the shoulders, and for what the old texts called the loosening of the cold humours that lodge in the joints. The chirurgeon would set 6 or 8 cups along the long muscles of the back, and the patient would lie on his belly upon the bed for half an hour, while the cups did their slow, gentle work. The cups themselves are kept in a wooden case lined with felt, that the glass may not knock against itself and break. The 14th is the cautery iron. The cautery iron is a small, slender rod of iron, perhaps a foot long, with a wooden handle at one end and a small button or knob of iron at the other. The iron of the cautery is heated in a small charcoal brazier until it glows a deep cherry red, and then is brought quickly to the wound. The abscess, the small bleeding vessel, and held there for the briefest moment to seal the flesh closed. The cautery is the tool of the chirurgeon's gravest moments. It is used to stop the bleeding of a wound that the needle and thread cannot close. It is used to seal the small vessels of a stump after an amputation. It is used to close the deep slough of a long-standing ulcer, that the slow weeping of the wound may at last cease. It is also, in the long medical tradition that runs back to the Arabic physician al-Zahrawi, used as a preventive against the dread of gangrene. The iron drawn quickly across the open flesh of a fresh wound to clean it of any small foulness. The cautery is fearful to look upon, with its deep cherry glow. The patient who is to receive it is given a strong dose of the soporific draught, the dwale, an old preparation of poppy and hemlock and lettuce, juice and bryony, which sets him into a deep, slow sleep. The chirurgeon performs the work quickly, with a steady hand, and is done in a moment. The smell of the cautery is the small sharp smell of seared flesh, and it lingers in the air for some time after. It is one of the smells of the medieval ward that the old physicians remembered most clearly. The 15th is the trephine. The trephine is the small terrible drill of the chirurgeon's case, used for the opening of the skull. It is a short cylindrical tube of hardened steel, perhaps an inch across, with a circle of small sharp teeth cut around its lower rim. A small handle is set crosswise at its upper end, and a small central pin in its center holds the instrument steady against the bone, while the chirurgeon turns the handle. With a slow, steady rotation of the handle, the small teeth cut a careful circle through the bone of the skull, removing a small disc. The trephine was used, in the rare cases that required it, for the relief of pressure upon the brain after a hard blow to the head. The patient would have come to the hospital with a deep wound to the skull from a fall, from a brawl, from a kick by a horse, from a fall from a tower or a roof. The pressure of the gathering blood beneath the bone would be felt to be the cause of the patient's deepening sleep, his slow speech, his uneven breathing. The chirurgeon would, after long careful prayer and consultation with the master, choose to attempt the trephination. The patient would be deeply sedated. The chirurgeon would shave a small patch of the scalp, make a small cut, and turn the trephine carefully through the bone. Once the disc was removed, the gathered blood would flow gently out, and the pressure would be relieved. The trephination was rare. It was attempted, perhaps 3 or 4 times in a year. It was successful, perhaps half of those times. It was, when it succeeded, one of the small recovered miracles of the chirurgeon's art. The trephine is kept in its own small case, lined with red felt, and is brought out only when needed. The Hôtel-Dieu's trephine in this year was made by a Parisian instrument maker named Estienne Cheval in the year 1363, and his small mark is stamped upon the side of the cylinder. The 16th is the bone saw. The bone saw is the tool of the gravest of all chirurgical works, the amputation. It is a short, stout saw, perhaps 8 inches long, with a slender steel blade set with fine teeth, and a stout wooden handle bound in copper at the end. The blade is curved gently, that it may pass through the bone without binding, and the teeth are set alternately to either side, that the curve may be wide enough for the blade to clear. The bone saw is used for the removal of a limb that cannot be saved. The limb may have been crushed beyond repair by a heavy fall. It may have been savaged by gangrene. The dark spreading rot that the medieval physicians knew well and feared above all things. It may have been so badly broken that the bone has set wrong and the patient's pain is now constant. The decision to amputate is made gravely by the master and the chirurgeon together after consultation with the chaplain and with the patient, who is told plainly what is to be done and given the chance to make his peace. The amputation, when it comes, is performed with as much care as the medieval art can summon. The patient is given the dwale, the strong soporific. He is bound carefully to the table to keep him still in the deep sleep. A tourniquet of plaited cloth is set above the place of cutting, drawn tight by a wooden screw. The chirurgeon makes the first cut with a long knife, drawing a clean sweep through the flesh down to the bone. The bone saw is then taken up, set against the bone, and drawn quickly through. The bleeding is stopped by the cautery iron and by the careful tying of the small vessels with waxed silk. The flap of skin is folded over and stitched. The whole work, when done well, is finished in less than 5 minutes, that the patient may be returned to his deep sleep before he is troubled too much by the ordeal. The 17th is the probe. The probe is the slender silver wire of the chirurgeon's case, used for the careful exploration of a wound. It is perhaps 8 inches long, no thicker than a knitting needle, smooth and rounded at one end, slightly flattened at the other. It is the most patient of the chirurgeon's tools. It is used to follow the path of a deep puncture wound, to feel for a hidden splinter, to find the small fragment of arrow or knife or stone that the wound has hidden, to test the depth of an abscess, to feel along the path of a fistula. The probe is used slowly. The chirurgeon takes it between his fingers, holds it against the lip of the wound, and lets it slide gently inward, watching the patient's face for the small flicker of pain that tells him the probe has touched something. He moves it in small, careful arcs, listening with his fingertips. As a piano tuner listens with his fingertips to the small singing of a string. The probe is the kind of work that asks for patience above all things. The chirurgeons of the Hôtel-Dieu sometimes take half an hour to follow a single wound with the probe while the patient lies in his sedated sleep, and the candle on the small bedside table burns slowly down. The probe has its own small case, a slender wooden tube lined with felt, and there are 3 of them, of slightly different sizes. The smallest, of soft pure silver, is reserved for delicate work near the eye or the ear. The middle, of harder silver alloy, is for the general work of the abdomen and the limbs. The largest, of polished bronze, is for the deep wounds of the chest and the back. The 18th is the forceps. The forceps is the gripping tool of the chirurgeon, used for the holding and the drawing of small fragments and the small tied knots. It is a pair of slender steel arms, hinged at one end, with small flat jaws at the other, set with fine cross, hatching to give a firm grip. The chirurgeon holds the forceps in his right hand, with his thumb in one ring and his second and third fingers in the other, and uses it as a kind of extension of his own hand, reaching where his hand is too large to go. The forceps draws out the small splinter that the probe has located. It draws out the small fragment of arrowhead, of broken tooth, of stone embedded in a wound. It holds the small thread that the chirurgeon is tying. It steadies the small piece of bandage as it is being applied. It is a tool of careful patience, used for hours together in any long work, and the chirurgeon must learn to hold it steady, without trembling, even when he is tired. The Hôtel-Dieu has 3 forceps of 3 different sizes, kept in their own velvet-lined case. The smallest is the work of the same Estienne Lecheval who made the trephine, and bears his small mark. The middle is older, perhaps 60 years old, of unknown make. The largest, the heaviest, is for the gripping of large fragments and the holding of larger threads, and is plainer in its making. The 19th is the needle and waxed thread. The chirurgeon's needle is a small, slender, curved blade of polished steel, perhaps 1.5 inches long, with a small eye at one end. The curve is gentle, like the curve of a small new moon. The point is sharp. The eye is small enough to thread carefully, but large enough to hold a strong thread. The chirurgeon uses the needle for the closing of the larger wounds, drawing the edges of the cut together with small, careful stitches, that the flesh may heal in a smooth line rather than in a long open valley. The thread is plain silk, drawn from the small spinneries of Paris, brought to the hospital in long skeins, and waxed before each use. The waxing is done with a small piece of pure beeswax, drawn along the length of the thread between the chirurgeon's fingers, until the thread takes on a soft yellowish tint and a slightly stiff feel. The wax serves 3 purposes. It strengthens the thread against the small, jagged forces of the flesh. It fills the small spaces between the thread and the cloth, that the wound may not weep, and it gives the thread a small natural property of resistance to corruption, for waxed silk lasts a great deal longer in the body than untreated silk. The chirurgeon stitches with small, careful, regular stitches, perhaps 1/4 inch apart, drawing the edges of the wound together, but not too tight, that the flesh may breathe and heal. He ties his small, careful knot at the end with the help of his forceps, snips the thread with a small pair of scissors, and lays the wound aside for the next work. The waxed thread, with proper care, holds the wound for long enough that the flesh itself takes hold and binds the cut, and the thread itself may then be removed in a week or 2. The 20th is the bone, setter's wooden splint. The bone, setter's splint, is the simplest tool in the case, and one of the oldest. It is a long, narrow piece of straight, smooth wood, perhaps 2 feet long and 3 inches wide, planed flat on one face and slightly rounded on the other, with the corners gently chamfered. There are several splints in the case, of different lengths for the different limbs. The longest is for the leg, the next for the arm, the next for the forearm, the smallest for the finger. When a patient comes to the hospital with a broken bone, the chirurgeon and his assistant lay him gently upon a long table, set the broken limb carefully upon the table, and feel along the bone with their fingertips, learning the line of the fracture. They draw the limb gently along its length, easing the broken ends of the bone back into their proper alignment. This is the work that is called the reduction. When the bone is set, the chirurgeon binds the limb with a long strip of plain linen soaked in egg, white and flour, which dries into a stiff bandage. The wooden splint is then bound along the limb, on either side, to hold the bone steady, and the whole is bound again with a final long strip of linen. The patient is laid on his bed and not moved for many days. The bone, setter's splints of the Hôtel-Dieu are made by Brother Anselm, the carpenter, who selects the wood with care, choosing only straight, grained pieces of beech or pine without knots. He plans them, sands them, and stores them in a wooden rack against the wall of the dispensary. Each splint may be used many times, washed between uses, and reused as long as it remains straight and unsplit. Some of the splints in the rack tonight are perhaps 30 years old and have set the bones of 300 or 400 patients across their long, quiet careers. We have, in this slow round, walked past 10 of the careful tools of the chirurgeon. Let us turn now to the third quiet group, the apothecary jars and vessels of the dispensary, kept in the long room set off the eastern end of the ward. The 20. First is the albarello jar. The albarello is the long, graceful ceramic jar that lines the upper shelves of every medieval apothecary in Christendom. It stands perhaps 8 inches tall, with a slightly wasted shape that swells gently in the middle and narrows again at the top and the bottom. It is made of glazed earthenware, fired in the long ovens of the Italian potters of Faenza or of Montelupo, painted in white tin glaze with bands of cobalt blue and ochre yellow about its waist and its rim. Upon its belly is painted, in small black letters, the Latin name of its contents, that any apothecary or sister who reaches for it may know at a glance what is within. The Hôtel-Dieu's dispensary has perhaps 400 such jars upon its shelves. Some hold dried herbs, some hold powders, some hold ointments. Some hold the dried fruits of the Orient, brought up the long, slow river from the port of Marseille. The albarellos are arranged upon the shelves in the order set out in the antidotarium, with the simples upon the lower shelves and the compounded medicines upon the higher. The jars are sealed at their tops with stopper of cork, wrapped in oiled paper and tied down with waxed string, that the contents may not lose their virtue to the slow damp of the long French autumns. The albarello is one of the great quiet inventions of the medieval pharmacy. It is exactly the right shape for the apothecary's hand. The wasted middle gives the fingers a place to grip without slipping. The narrow top is wide enough for a slender measure to be drawn down into the contents, but narrow enough to seal cleanly. The flat bottom keeps the jar steady on the shelf. The painted name keeps it from being mistaken. The Hôtel-Dieu's albarellos have been ordered at intervals across the centuries, the oldest perhaps 100 years old, the newest brought up from Faenza only in the spring. The 22nd is the mortar and pestle. The mortar is a heavy round vessel of thick polished bronze, perhaps 8 inches across at the mouth, narrowing slightly toward the bottom, sitting solidly upon a flat foot. It weighs nearly 12 pounds and stands like a small shrine upon the workbench of the dispensary. The pestle that goes with it is a slender, heavy rod of the same bronze, perhaps 1.5 feet long, with a smooth rounded knob at one end for the grinding and a slightly tapered handle at the other for the hand. The mortar and pestle are used for the grinding of the herbs and roots and seeds of the medieval pharmacy. The dried chamomile flower is reduced to a fine powder for the making of pills. The cinnamon stick is broken to a coarse meal for the spicing of a syrup. The mustard seed is crushed for a poultice. The dried mineral salts are ground for a wash. The work is slow. The apothecary holds the pestle in his right hand, with his left hand braced against the rim of the mortar, and brings the pestle down with a steady rocking motion, turning the head of the pestle slightly with each stroke, drawing the contents up from the bottom and crushing them anew. The sound of the mortar, when the work is steady, is a slow, soft, rhythmic, dull tapping, hardly louder than a dripping rain. It carries through the dispensary all the long working morning, and a sister passing the open door knows by the sound that the apothecary is at his work. The mortar of the Hôtel Du is the same mortar that has stood upon the workbench since the year 1297. The bronze has darkened to a soft brown patina across the centuries, and the inner bowl has been polished to a high gloss by the long, quiet motion of the pestles that have crossed it. The 23rd is the copper alembic. The alembic is the strange and beautiful vessel of distillation, the still of the medieval apothecary. It stands in the corner of the dispensary, set upon a small stone hearth, with its slender neck rising up into the high air and curving gracefully over to the side, where it descends into a small cooling vessel of copper. The alembic is used for the distillation of the waters of the apothecary: the rose water, the lavender water, the lemon balm water, the orange flower water, and a dozen other herbal waters that are kept in small dark bottles for the gentle users of the dispensary. The work is slow. The apothecary fills the lower vessel of the alembic with the herb and water, sets the upper neck in place, and lights a small slow fire of charcoal beneath. The water within is brought slowly to a soft simmer. The vapor rises into the slender neck, passes around the long curve, and condenses in the cool tube on the other side, dripping slowly, drop by drop, into the small receiving flask. From a great kettle of fresh rose petals and water, the alembic may yield only a small flask of true rose water, but that small flask will be more concentrated, more pure, more lasting than any decoction. The alembic is also used for the making of the strong distilled spirits, the aqua vita of the medieval physician, used as the base for tinctures and as a preservative. The distillation of strong spirit is slow, careful work, with the apothecary watching the slow drip and the slow heat of the fire, sometimes for many hours together. The Hôtel-Dieu's alembic was made in Marseille in the year 1348, in the quiet years just before the first great wave of the pestilence, by a coppersmith named Antoine. Its slender neck rises in a graceful arc against the wall of the dispensary, and the copper has gone the soft, warm orange, red of well-tended and well-loved metal. The 24th is the pewter ointment box. Upon a lower shelf of the dispensary are arranged a long row of small flat round boxes of pewter, perhaps 3 inches across and 1.5 inches deep, each with a snug, tight, fitting lid. They are the ointment boxes, the small containers in which the apothecary keeps the made-up ointments and salves of his trade. The pewter is the soft grey alloy of tin and lead, easy to work, easy to clean, and resistant to the slow corruption that overtakes a wooden box used for greasy preparations. Each box holds a different ointment. There is the ointment of marshmallow root for soothing burns. There is the ointment of comfrey for the closing of wounds. There is the ointment of rose for the easing of skin troubles. There is the ointment of mercury for the treatment of certain stubborn skin diseases. There is the ointment of bear's grease for the warming of cold limbs. There is the ointment of betony for the dressing of slow, healing ulcers. Each box bears upon its lid a small stamped Latin name, that the apothecary may not mistake one for another. The boxes are filled in batches every few weeks, when the apothecary has prepared a fresh kettle of ointment in the small hearth pot of the dispensary. The cold ointment is spooned into each box with a small bone scoop. The lid is pressed down firmly, the box is wiped clean, and is set back upon its shelf. A box of ointment, properly made and properly sealed, will keep for many months. The 25th is the earthenware syrup pot. Upon a long shelf in the cool corner of the dispensary stand the syrup pots, large round vessels of glazed earthenware, perhaps a foot tall and 10 inches across, with handles on either side and tight, fitting wooden lids stoppered with cork. The pots hold the syrups, the slow sweet liquid medicines of the medieval apothecary, made by the long simmering of herbs and fruits and spices in honey or in sugar. There is the syrup of violet, made each spring from the small purple violets gathered in the woods around Vincennes. There is the syrup of rose, made from the petals of the apothecary's roses planted along the south wall of the garden. There is the syrup of lemon, brought up from the south, used for the cooling of fevers. There is the syrup of poppy, kept on a high shelf, drawn out only at the master's order, used for the easing of long pain and the giving of sleep. There is the syrup of licorice, used for the soothing of the cough. There is the syrup of horehound for the same. There is the syrup of mulberry, deep purple, used for the easing of sore throats. The syrup pots are heavy and are set upon the lower shelves, so they may be lifted without strain. Each is labeled with a strip of parchment glued to the side, in the careful hand of the apothecary, with the name of the syrup and the date of its making. A pot of syrup, kept cool and tightly sealed, will last a year. The Hôtel-Dieu has perhaps 30 such pots upon its shelves, and the slow, steady making of fresh syrups is one of the great labors of the dispensary's year. The 26th is the leather costrel. The costrel is the small portable flask of the medieval apothecary, used for the carrying of medicines from the dispensary to the bedside, and for the dosing of patients in their beds. It is a small curved leather bottle, perhaps the size of a large pier, with a narrow neck and a wooden stopper bound at the top with a cord that runs around the body of the costrel. It is made by a leather worker in the city, of soft tanned leather sewn with tight waxed thread, and its inside is lined with pitch to keep the leather from soaring the contents. The costrel is filled at the dispensary with whatever is needed for the round, perhaps a measure of the syrup of poppy, perhaps a measure of an electuary, perhaps a measure of a tonic wine. The apothecary or the lay sister carries the costrel by its cord, set over the shoulder, on her round of the wards. At each bedside that requires the medicine, the small wooden cup is held out. The costrel is unstopped, the dose is poured carefully, the patient drinks, and the costrel is restoppered. By the end of the round, the costrel is empty and is returned to the dispensary to be cleaned, rinsed, and set aside until the next dosing. The costrel is light and unbreakable, which is its great virtue. A glass bottle used for the same purpose would be heavy and fragile. The costrel of plain leather may be dropped or knocked against the bedstead without harm. The Hôtel-Dieu has perhaps a dozen costrels in its dispensary, of slightly different sizes, for slightly different uses, and they are taken up and set down many times in any given day. The 27th is the small horn cup. At the side of the dispensary table stands a small wooden box, lined with felt, holding perhaps 50 small cups, each of polished horn. The cups are made from the broad cattle, horn of the slaughter, yard scraped clean, polished smooth, cut to the proper length, and set upon a small wooden base. They hold perhaps 2 ounces each, and are the standard measure for a single dose of liquid medicine. The horn cup is used for the dosing of the patient. The apothecary or the sister fills the cup from the costrel or the syrup pot, brings it to the bedside, and holds it to the patient's lips. The patient drinks, the cup is taken away, wiped clean with a small linen cloth, and returned to the dispensary at the end of the round. The cups are washed in hot water at the end of each day. The horn does not crack, does not chip, does not break, and gives no taste of its own to the medicine. It is the perfect small vessel for the work. The cups are not strictly identical. Some are slightly taller, some slightly broader. Each has its own small character, its own small marks. The sisters who have served on the wards for many years come to know the cups and have their favorites. Sister Marie of the Night Watch, who has served at the Hôtel-Dieu for 18 years, has a particular cup with a small pail flecking upon its outer side, which she always reaches for first when she pours the night's poppy syrup. The cup has been hers, in this small unspoken way, for many years. The 28th is the tin pill mold. Upon the workbench of the dispensary stands a small flat tray of tin, perhaps 8 inches square, set with rows of small round depressions, each the size of a chickpea. It is the pill mold, the simple device by which the apothecary forms his pills. The pill mass is prepared first in the mortar, by the slow combining of the powdered herb with a base of honey or of breadcrumb, kneaded into a soft brown dough. The dough is rolled into a long thin rope upon the marble of the workbench. The rope is laid across the tin mold, and the apothecary presses down with a second flat tin plate, cutting the rope into pellets and pressing each pellet into the small round form of a pill. The pills are turned out of the mold onto a small linen cloth, dusted with a little powder of licorice or of orris root to keep them from sticking, and set in the warm air of the dispensary to dry. They are then gathered into small round wooden boxes, each box holding perhaps 50 pills, each box labeled with the name of the medicine and the date of the making. A pill, properly made, will keep for many months. The pill mode of the Hôtel-Dieu was made in the city by a tin smith named Pierre. The tin has darkened with long use, but the small round depressions are as smooth and as true as the day they were stamped. Many thousands of pills have been formed in this small tray, and many thousands more will be in the years to come. The 29th is the dispensary scales. Upon the center of the workbench stands the most important instrument of the apothecary's trade, the small balance, scale upon which all the careful weighings of the dispensary are performed. It is a small set of scales, perhaps a foot tall in its frame, with a slender brass beam balanced upon a sharp pivot of polished steel, 2 small brass pans suspended from its ends by slender chains, and a small needle that hangs down from the center to mark the precise position of balance. To weigh a powder, the apothecary places the small reference weight upon one pan and the powder upon the other, sliding the powder gently from a small horn spoon until the needle hangs still in the center of its small marked dial. The reference weights are kept in a small velvet, lined case beside the scales, a long row of small brass cylinders of standard weights, the smallest of single grain, the next 2 grains, the next 5, the next 10, the next 20, and so on up to the larger weights of an ounce and a pound. The work of weighing is the most exacting work of the dispensary. A small error of a grain or 2 in the weighing of a poppy syrup or a dose of mercury could mean the difference between a healing dose and a harmful one. The apothecary performs the work slowly, with care, often weighing the same dose twice over to be sure. The scales of the Hôtel-Dieu were made by a Dutch instrument maker named Hendrik of Antwerp in the year 1345, and they have been in continuous use ever since. They are tested every 6 months against a master's set of weights kept locked in the master's strong box and have not yet been found to wander. The 30th is the wooden spice drawer, set against the back wall of the dispensary. Behind the workbench stands a tall, narrow cabinet of dark oak, perhaps 6 feet high, 4 feet wide, and 2 feet deep. The front of the cabinet is set with rows of small drawers, perhaps 100 drawers in all, each no larger than a child's hand, each fitted with a small brass pull and a small slip of parchment glued to the front, naming the contents in the apothecary's careful hand. It is the spice drawer, the cabinet of small precious things. The drawers hold the spices and the rare ingredients of the medieval pharmacy: black pepper from the long sea, ports of Venice; cinnamon from the Orient; cloves from the islands beyond Cathay; nutmeg, ginger, mace, cardamom, saffron, the small dried buds of the dried orange peel, the dried rind of the lemon, the dried scrapings of horn from the unicorn, horn that the apothecary has bought from the cathedral apothecaries on the strength of the master's word. Each spice has its own drawer. Each drawer is opened only when the spice is needed, weighed carefully on the scales, used in the proper measure, and returned to its drawer. The drawers are tight-fitting, that the smell of one spice may not contaminate another. The brass pulls are polished to a soft glow by the sister's daily attention. The whole cabinet, when one stands close to it, gives off a low, complex, sweet smell, the small mixed perfume of all the world's spices in their small wooden chambers. To open a drawer is to bring forth a single thread of that great cord. The cinnamon drawer breathes its warm, sweet woodiness into the air. The cardamom drawer breathes its bright, cool sharpness. The saffron drawer opened gives off the deep, slow, earthy gold of its precious threads. The drawers are quiet for most of the day, but each is opened in the slow course of a working week, several times, and each gives up a small, careful measure of its contents to the work of the dispensary. We have walked, in this slow round, past 10 of the apothecary's vessels. Let us turn now to the 4th quiet group. The herbs that hang in the dispensary above the workbench, the simples of the medieval pharmacy, from which all the more elaborate preparations begin. The 31st is the chamomile flower, hanging from the rafters of the dispensary in a long line of small linen bags are the dried chamomile flowers gathered in the long summer days from the herb garden along the south wall. The chamomile is the small daisy, like flower of the European meadow, with a soft yellow center and a fringe of white petals and a clean apple, like scent when the flower is bruised between the fingers. The chamomile is the gentlest of all the apothecary's herbs, and the most often used. It is the herb of the troubled stomach, of the restless evening, of the small fever in a young child. It is given as an infusion, dried flowers in hot water, steeped under a saucer for some minutes, the liquid then sweetened with a little honey. A cup of chamomile tea is the simplest preparation in all the dispensary. It is given to nearly every patient who comes to the hospital with the small unspecific complaints of the body, the small troubled sleep, the small slow indigestion. It does no harm. It does, gently, considerable good. The chamomile bags hang in the dispensary in long quiet rows, their soft lemon gone slightly creamy with the years, their contents replenished each summer when the flowers come fresh from the garden. The smell of the dispensary, beneath the harder smells of the bitter herbs and the sharp resins, is always faintly the smell of chamomile, the soft apple, meadow scent of the gentlest of medicines. The 32nd is wormwood. Upon a slightly higher shelf, in a stronger linen bag with a darker label, hang the dried sprigs of wormwood. It is a tall silver, grey plant of the dry stony banks, with feathery fine, cut leaves and small inconspicuous yellow flowers, and a smell that is bitter, dry, slightly turpentine, slightly camphor, the smell of an old ship's chest left long closed. The wormwood is the great bitter herb of the medieval pharmacy. It is the standard treatment for the slow worms of the gut that troubled so many patients of the medieval city, the small helminths and round worms of the unclean drinking water. A weak infusion of the dried sprigs in hot water sweetened a great deal with honey to mask the bitterness, was given over several days to clear the gut. It is also used as a tonic for the slow recovery from a long fever in small doses for the stimulating of the appetite. The bitter principle of the wormwood was held by the medieval physicians to wake the stomach, to bring back the desire for food, and to set the slow, recovering body on its way back toward the kitchen and the table. The wormwood is also one of the herbs of the strewing, used by the sisters in the spring cleaning of the wards, when the dried stalks are scattered upon the stone floor and trodden underfoot, releasing their bitter scent into the air, that the small unwelcome insects of the warmer months may be discouraged. The wormwood is therefore both a medicine of the body and a small protector of the ward, present in two ways at once. The 33rd is rosemary. Hanging beside the wormwood, in a slightly larger bag, are the long-needled sprigs of dried rosemary, brought up from the warm hills of Provence in great bundles each autumn by the southern carriers. The rosemary is the small woody shrub of the Mediterranean coast, with slender silvery green needles and a strong aromatic scent of pine, resin and warm sun, and small pale blue flowers in the early spring. In the apothecary, rosemary is used for many quiet purposes. A weak infusion is given for the slow grief of an old loss, on the principle of the old saying that rosemary is for remembrance. A stronger preparation, the rosemary and rue tincture, is rubbed upon the temples of those who suffer from the long melancholy. The dried needles are added to the warm baths of the convalescent, that the warm vapor of the herb may strengthen the breath. The fresh sprigs, when they can be had, are tucked into the linen presses, that they may give their clean scent to the bed linens of the wards. The rosemary is also the herb of the long memory of the sick, used at funerals and at the laying out of the dead, when a small sprig is laid in the hands of the dead. Before the closing of the coffin, the Hôtel-Dieu has its own small store of rosemary, always kept aside for this purpose, and the sister of the death room never lacks for a fresh sprig when the moment comes. The 34th is lavender. Beside the rosemary, in a long line of small linen bags, hang the dried buds of lavender, gathered in the small fields outside the city. In the long warm days of July, the lavender is the small woody shrub of the southern hills, with slender silver, green leaves, and tall narrow spikes of small purple flowers, and the most beloved scent in all the European pharmacy, the soft, sweet floral lavender that the Romans gave to the bath houses of their empire. The lavender is used in many gentle ways in the apothecary. A weak infusion of the dried buds is given for the simple troubled sleep, sweetened with a little honey, drunk warm in the hour before bed. A stronger distillation is the lavender water of the dispensary, kept in small dark blue bottles upon the upper shelf, drawn out a few drops at a time, rubbed upon the temples of those troubled by megrim, set into the warm cloth that wipes the brow of one in fever. The lavender bags are the great fresh, smelling treasure of the dispensary. To open one, after a long winter, is to be carried back at once to the hot stony hills of Provence in the long blue afternoons of July. The smell is the small sweet voice of the south, kept alive in Lennon, brought into the slow grey rooms of the northern wards. The patients of the long winter are sometimes given a small lavender bag to hold beneath their pillows, and the sisters say that the simple scent does as much good as any harder medicine. The 35th is sage. Upon the next shelf hang the dried leaves of sage, gathered from the herb garden each autumn, just before the first frosts. The sage is the soft grey, green shrub of the kitchen garden, with thick velvet, textured leaves and small purple flowers in the late summer, and a strong musky scent like dried hay and warm damp earth combined. The sage is the herb of the throat and the mouth, used as a gargle for the sore throat, as a wash for the inflamed gum, as a tea for the slow lingering cough. A handful of the dried leaves steeped in hot water, with a little honey and a little vinegar added, makes a strong gargle that the patient holds in the back of the mouth for some moments before spitting out. The sage is also given in stronger preparations for the slow night sweats of the long fevers of the city, for the heavy sweating that wakes the patient in the small hours. The sage of the Hôtel-Dieu is grown in the dispensary garden by the lay brother who tends the herbs, Brother Jacques, a quiet old man who has been at this work for 28 years. He knows the precise day to gather the sage. He knows the precise way to dry it, hung in small bundles in the dim airy loft above the dispensary, the leaves crisping slowly to a brittle dark grey, green over the course of 2 weeks. He knows the precise way to store it, layered into small linen bags with a small piece of dried orris root, tucked among the leaves to discourage the small grey moth that troubles the herb stores. The sage of his hands is reliably the best sage in any dispensary in Paris. The 36th is hyssop. Beside the sage hangs the dried hyssop in long slender bags. The hyssop is the small upright herb of the kitchen garden, with slender pointed leaves, small spires of dark blue flowers in the late summer, and a strong, slightly bitter, slightly minty smell. It is the ancient herb of the holy purifications, named in the Psalm of the King David, when he prayed that the Lord might purge him with hyssop, and he should be clean. The hyssop is used in the apothecary for the slow congestions of the chest, for the lingering catarrh, for the bronchial complaints of the long cold winters. A strong decoction of the dried herb is taken for several days, sweetened with honey, and the patient's chest is rubbed with a salve of hyssop in olive oil. The hyssop is also used for the bruises of the body, applied in a warm compress, that the slow yellow of the bruise may be drawn away more quickly. The hyssop is one of the herbs that links the apothecary to the chapel, for the small bunch of dried hyssop hangs in the corner of the death room as well, used in the asperging of holy water at the time of the last sacraments. The herb is at home in both rooms, and is one of the small quiet threads that runs through the cloth of the medieval hospital. binding the work of the body to the work of the soul. The 37th is marshmallow root. Upon a low shelf, in a long flat box, lie the dried roots of the marshmallow plant, the Althea officinalis of the old Latin name. The root has been dug from the wet ground of the river bank in the late autumn, scraped clean, sliced into long thin slices, dried slowly in the dispensary loft, and stored for use. The slices are pale, almost white, slightly translucent, with a soft fibrous texture. To the touch they are smooth. To the tongue they are faintly sweet, faintly mucilaginous, leaving a slight slippery feel upon the lips. The marshmallow root is the great soothing herb of the medieval pharmacy, used for the inflamed places of the body, both within and without. A decoction of the root, simmered slowly in water for several hours, yields a thick, clear, soothing liquid, almost like a thin egg white, which is given for the inflamed throat, for the sore stomach, for the troubled gut. A stronger decoction, reduced and mixed with honey, becomes a soft poultice that is laid upon burns, upon abrasions, upon the slow ulcers of the legs of the bedridden. The slippery quality of the root coats the inflamed surface and protects it while the body's own slow healing does its work. The marshmallow root has been gathered for the Hôtel-Dieu for many centuries. The patch of marshmallows that grows along the south bank of the river, just east of the cathedral, is a small ancestral patch, gathered each autumn by the lay brother who tends the herbs, replanted carefully with new young plants each spring, kept in steady production through long careful tending. The patch has been there, in some form or other, since before the time of the first written records of the hospital. The 38th is coriander seed. Upon a higher shelf, in a small clay jar, lie the small round dried seeds of the coriander plant, the small herb of the kitchen garden whose leaves are used in the Mediterranean cooking, and whose seeds are kept for the apothecary. The seeds are the size of small peppercorns, slightly ridged, of a pale tan color, with a soft, warm, spicy citric scent that is released as soon as one of them is bruised between the fingers. The coriander seed is used in the apothecary for the slow gas of the gut, for the small flatulence that troubles many of the elderly patients of the wards, for the small distension that follows a heavy meal. A weak infusion of the crushed seeds in hot water, sweetened with honey, is given to ease the gut. The seeds are also added to many of the more bitter preparations of the apothecary, that the small, sweet, spicy note may make the medicine easier to swallow. The coriander seeds of the Hôtel-Dieu are bought from the spice merchants of the city, who in their turn buy them from the long caravan trade up the valley of the Rhône, which in its turn buys them from the merchants of Genoa, who buy them from the merchants of the Levant, who buy them from the gardens of the Persian and Egyptian growers. Each small seed has therefore traveled a long, quiet road across half the world before it comes to rest in this small clay jar upon the dispensary shelf in Paris. The 39th is aloe. Upon the highest shelf of the dispensary, in a small dark glass bottle stoppered with a piece of cork, is kept the dried aloe, the bitter purgative herb that comes up the long, slow trade routes from Yemen and from the eastern coast of Africa. The aloe is a small succulent plant of the desert, whose thick, fleshy leaves, when cut, weep a clear yellow sap. The sap is dried in the sun until it forms a hard, dark, resinous block, the color of black amber, with a deeply bitter scent. The aloe is the great purgative of the medieval pharmacy. A small piece, broken from the block, ground in the mortar to a fine powder, mixed with a little honey to make a paste, made up into a small pill, is one of the standard treatments for the slow blocked gut. The dose is small, perhaps a single pill, perhaps half a pill, taken with much water. The aloe is also added to many compounded preparations as a small tonic for the slow liver, for the troubled bile, for the long-standing congestions of the lower body. The aloe is one of the most expensive herbs in the dispensary, for it has come the longest road, and the small block that sits upon the high shelf has cost more than a sister's monthly stipend. It is therefore used sparingly, and the small bottle is kept on the highest shelf, drawn down only at the master's word, and replaced upon the shelf as soon as the dose has been measured. The Hôtel-Dieu's current bottle of aloe was bought from the apothecary of the cathedral chapter in the early summer of this year. It will last, with careful use, perhaps 2 years. The 40th is theriac, upon a small special locked cabinet at the back of the dispensary, in a small painted ceramic jar with a silver lid, is kept the most famous medicine of the medieval pharmacy, the great compound preparation called theriac. The theriac is a slow, careful preparation made from over 60 different ingredients, including herbs, minerals, and the famous viper's flesh, all combined according to a recipe that runs back to the great Greek physician Galen and refined across the long centuries by the apothecaries of Constantinople, of Cairo, of Salerno, and of Venice. The theriac of the Hôtel-Dieu was bought from the great theriac makers of Venice, who held the most prized recipe of the medieval Mediterranean. It came up the long sea route to Marseille, across by river to Lyon, north to Paris, and was delivered to the master physician's office in a sealed wooden chest with the wax seal of the Venetian Senate upon its lid. The seal was broken in the master's presence, the small jar removed, the silver lid sealed again with the master's own seal, and the jar set carefully upon the locked cabinet. The theriac is given for the gravest emergencies of the apothecary's art. It is given for the bites of mad dogs. It is given for the suspected poisonings, in the small doses that the master judges proper. It is given, with the master's express permission, for the slow stages of the dread of the pestilence, in the hope that its many potent ingredients may strengthen the body in its long crisis. It is, in any of these uses, used in the smallest possible measures, and never without the master's word. The jar has been opened only 6 times in this current year, but its presence on the locked cabinet is one of the great quiet reassurances of the dispensary. We have walked in this slow round past 10 of the herbs of the dispensary. Let us turn now to the 5th quiet group, the religious objects of the small chapel set into the eastern end of the great ward, before whose altar the patients lie. The 41st is the altar of the ward chapel, set into the eastern end of the Salle Saint Thomas. Beneath a low arched opening cut into the masonry is a small chapel, perhaps 12 feet square, with a stone altar standing against its eastern wall. The altar is of pale Ken stone, brought up the river from Normandy in the year 1240, when the chapel was first set into the ward. It is a simple oblong block, perhaps 5 feet long, 3 feet wide, 3.5 feet high, with a small carved cross set into the front face. Upon its top is laid a single linen altar cloth, embroidered at its edges with a simple pattern of vines and small leaves in pale gold thread, the work of the sisters of the house in some long past winter. The altar is the central point of the long ward. The beds are arranged so that every patient, lying upon his back, may turn his head and see the altar through the arched opening. The single beeswax candle that burns upon the altar day and night is the slow, constant light at the eastern end of the room. To the patients of the long ward, who lie for many days and many weeks in the same bed, the altar is the still center of the world. They have looked at it through their fevers, through their long nights, through their slow recoveries. They know its small carved cross. They know the soft fall of the altar cloth. They know the slow flicker of the candle. The altar has watched them. They have watched the altar. The Mass is said at the altar each morning at the first light of dawn by the chaplain of the house in the small low murmur of the Latin office, that the patients of the ward may hear the soft cadence of the prayers as they wake. Most patients hear the Mass without rising from their beds. Those who can rise may come, if they choose, to kneel at the small wooden bench set before the altar. In the slow, long days of recovery, the small daily ritual of the morning Mass is one of the great quiet anchors of the ward. The 42nd is the reliquary of Saint Christopher. Set into a small carved niche in the wall above the altar, behind a small grill of wrought iron, is a small reliquary, a little gilded box of brass, perhaps 6 inches square, with small painted figures of the saint set into its sides and a small glass window in its front. Through the window may be seen a small fragment of bone, perhaps 2 inches long, set upon a little cushion of red velvet. The fragment is a relic of Saint Christopher, the patron saint of travelers and of those threatened by sudden death. Brought to the hospital in the year 1307 by a pilgrim who had bought it on his return journey from the Holy Land. The reliquary is the most precious object in the chapel. It is the visible token of the saint's continuing presence in the place. The pilgrim and the wounded and the gravely ill, who have sought out the Hôtel-Dieu in their need, are watched over by the saint of travelers, the strong man of the legend who carried the Christ child across the dangerous river, who is the protector of all those who must make a difficult passage. The patients of the ward, in the small private prayers of their long nights, often address themselves quietly to Saint Christopher of the Niche and ask his help in their own dangerous passages of fever and of pain. The reliquary is dusted each week by the sacristan, the lay sister whose particular charge is the chapel and its contents. Her name in this year is Sister Margaret, a quiet woman of 42, who has been the sacristan for 12 years. She knows the reliquary intimately. Her quiet daily care is one of the small invisible threads that holds the whole place steady. The 43rd is the carved wooden crucifix above the door, set above the inner doorway of the chapel. Where it can be seen from anywhere in the long ward is a wooden crucifix of dark walnut, perhaps 3 feet tall, the figure of the crucified Christ carved in some detail by a craftsman of the city in the year 1320. The figure is somewhat worn now by the slow accumulation of the smoke of 60 years of candles, the dark wood gone slightly darker, the small carved features softened a little by the long air. The crucifix is the central image of the ward, the visible reminder of the suffering that the place is meant to ease, the suffering of Christ, that gives meaning to the long suffering of the sick. The patients of the ward, lying upon their backs, see the crucifix at the head of the room. They see it in the morning when they wake. They see it in the evening when the candles are lit. They see it in the dark of the night, when only the small flicker of the altar candle gives any light at all to the upper reaches of the wall. The crucifix has been carried, on rare occasions, in slow procession through the wards, when the chaplain blesses the place at the great festivals of the church, at Easter and at Christmas, and at the feasts of the patron saints. On those days the crucifix is taken down by the sacristan, set upon a small wooden carrying pole, and borne slowly along the central aisle, while the chaplain sings the appropriate antiphons in his low, even voice. On every other day, the crucifix is in its place above the door, watching the long ward in the slow, steady way of all such carved figures, neither hurried nor disturbed. The 44th is the painted altarpiece. Set against the eastern wall behind the altar, mounted upon two carved wooden brackets driven into the stone, is a small painted altarpiece, a panel of seasoned oak about 3 feet high and 4 feet wide, painted in tempera by a Parisian master named Jean d'Orlay, and in the year 1378. The painting shows the Virgin Mary in a deep blue robe, holding the infant Christ, with 2 angels in robes of pale rose and pale green standing on either side, and a small kneeling figure of a sick man in plain white robe at the base, raising his hands toward the Holy Mother in a gesture of simple supplication. The altarpiece is a recent addition to the chapel. It was given by the widow of a Parisian banker in memory of her husband, who had been treated kindly at the hospital in the last weeks of his life. She had ordered it from the master Jean and had it delivered to the chapel only 2 years ago. The colors are still bright. The blue of the Virgin's robe, made from the precious stone called lapis lazuli ground to a fine powder, is the deep slow blue of a clear summer evening. The gold of the halos, made of small leaves of gold beaten thinner than the thinnest paper, catches the candle light and seems to glow softly even in the low light of the night candles. The patients of the ward, lying in their beds, see the altarpiece through the arch of the chapel doorway. The figure of the kneeling sick man, raising his hands to the Virgin, is the small visible promise of the place, the medieval idea of the hospital as a small holy ground, where the sick are placed under the particular care of the saints and of the Virgin, is given, in this small painted panel, its quiet, visible form. The 45th is the Book of Hours. Upon a small wooden lectern set to the side of the altar lies a Book of Hours, a small book of personal devotions used by the chaplain in his quiet daily round. It is a small, thick volume, perhaps 6 inches by 4, bound in dark brown leather, with a small silver clasp at its edge. Within, the book holds the 7 canonical hours of the daily prayer: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers and compline, each laid out in fine, careful Latin script with small illuminated initials in red and blue. The Book of Hours of the Hôtel-Dieu chapel is a fine working book, made by the scriptorium of the canons of Notre Dame in the year 1342, on parchment of fine calf skin, with small, quiet illustrations at the head of each of the hours. The illustrations are simple: a small figure of a praying saint at the head of matins, a small figure of a sun rising at the head of lauds, a small figure of a working peasant at the head of prime, a small figure of a fishing boat at the head of terrace. The illustrations are the small visual rhythm of the day's prayer, opening into the patient's eye through the candle. Light as the chaplain turns the page. The book is the chaplain's own working book, used by him each day. He knows where each page falls. He has, like an old organist with his familiar instrument, a slight, quiet relationship with the book that has grown across the years of his ministry. The chaplain in this year is Father Jean, a quiet old priest of 66 who has served the Hôtel-Dieu for 19 years and who turns the pages of this book each day with the small, precise gentleness that long use brings. The 46th is the brass holy water stoup, set into a small niche in the stone of the chapel doorway. Just inside the threshold stands a small basin of polished brass, perhaps 8 inches across, fixed to the wall by a slender bracket. It is the holy water stoup, the small basin in which the consecrated water is kept for the entering of the chapel. The stoup is filled each morning by the sacristan from a small clay pitcher of fresh holy water, which has been blessed at the Easter ceremonies of the previous year and is renewed each Easter from the great font of the cathedral. The stoup is small, but the water within it is the same water of the great font, blessed by the bishop, kept holy by the slow, careful keeping of the cathedral and the chapel. Each person who enters the chapel, whether sister or chaplain or patient, dips 2 fingers into the small bright water, makes the small sign of the cross upon the forehead and the breast, and passes through. The patients who can walk to the chapel for the morning Mass do this without thinking. The sisters who pass in and out 100 times in the day make the gesture without thought. The chaplain, who passes through the doorway perhaps 50 times in any given day, makes it most reliably of all. The small bright water, blessed at the Easter, is touched by some 1,000 fingers in any given week and is renewed slowly as the small evaporation of the brass basin pulls a little of the water away into the soft air of the chapel each day. The 47th is the taper of pure beeswax. Upon the altar, set into a slender candlestick of polished brass at the center of the altar cloth, burns a single tall taper of pure beeswax. The taper is perhaps 18 inches tall, an inch thick at the base, narrowing slightly toward the top, with a slender cotton wick. It is made in the candle room of the hospital by Brother Gills the candle maker, the same Brother Gills who makes the candles for the iron stands of the ward, but the chapel taper is of finer make, of purer wax, of more careful pouring. The taper burns continuously, day and night, throughout the year. It is the perpetual candle of the altar, the visible sign of the continuing presence of Christ in the small consecrated space. When one taper burns low, before it can gutter, the sacristan brings a fresh taper, lights it from the dying flame of the old, sets it carefully into the candlestick, and removes the stub. The transfer is made without break. The flame has not, for many decades, been allowed to go out. The same flame, in some quiet sense, has burned upon the altar of this chapel since the day the chapel was first consecrated. To stand at the door of the chapel, in the deep middle of the night, when the long ward is asleep, and the only sound is the slow breathing of the patients, and the faint hum of the river outside, and to see the small steady flame of the chapel taper at the eastern end, is to feel the particular quiet of a medieval hospital at its deepest. The flame is slow, the flame is steady, The flame is in some way the small, still heart of the whole long building. The 48th is the censer. Hanging from a wrought iron hook in the corner of the chapel, on a slender brass chain, is a small censer, a swinging metal vessel of polished brass, perhaps 6 inches in diameter, pierced with small decorative holes through which the smoke may escape. Inside the censer is set a small ceramic dish in which the burning charcoal and the grains of incense are placed. The censer is used at the high feasts of the chapel and at the funerals of those who die in the wards. The chaplain, robed in his simple white alb and pale stole, takes up the censer by its chain, swings it gently 3 times over the body of the dead or the open page of the Gospel, and the small clouds of fragrant white smoke rise up into the air of the chapel and drift slowly out into the long ward. The smoke carries the soft mixed scent of frankincense and myrrh, the resinous gums of the Levant, the same scents that the 3 Magi of the Gospel are said to have brought to the manger. The smoke of the censer, when it drifts out into the long ward at the time of a funeral, is one of the small marks of grace in the day. The patients of the ward, lying in their beds, smell the soft, sweet smoke and know that one of their company is being given his proper farewell. The smoke is the small message from the chapel to the long ward. The censer is therefore one of the small connectors between the holy ground of the chapel and the lived life of the wards. The 49th is the small bell of the priest. Set on a small ledge by the altar, within easy reach of the chaplain's hand, is a small brass bell, perhaps 2 inches high, with a slender bone handle. It is the priest's bell, the small bell that is rung at the elevation of the host during the Mass. When the consecrated bread is lifted up before the altar and the small, clear voice of the bell calls the attention of the faithful to the central moment of the rite. The bell is rung 3 times. The chaplain takes it up by its handle, gives it 3 small, clear strokes against the inside of his palm, and sets it down again. The patients of the long ward, hearing the small, clear bell from the chapel, lift their heads from their pillows, make the small sign of the cross, and lie back. The bell is therefore the auditory link between the chapel and the long ward, the small clear voice that connects the patient's slow morning waking to the central act of the Mass. The bell of the Hôtel-Dieu chapel is a fine small bell of pure brass, made in the bell foundry of the city of Tours in the year 1336. It bears upon its inside, in small raised letters, the name of the founder, Pierre of Tours, and the date of its making. The bone of its handle is the polished thigh, bone of a small deer, fitted into the bell by a craftsman of the city, and it has been replaced perhaps 3 times across the long life of the bell. The 50th is the sacrament cup of the last rites. Upon a small locked cabinet beside the altar, behind a small wooden door fitted with a brass lock, is kept the small ceremonial cup used by the chaplain in the administration of the last rites to the dying. It is a small chalice of polished silver, perhaps 4 inches tall, with a slender stem and a small flat foot, finely worked by a silversmith of Paris. The cup holds perhaps an ounce of the consecrated wine, which is given to the dying patient as the small final viaticum, the food for the road. The last rites are given to those patients of the wards who have reached the end of their long sickness. The chaplain comes to the bedside, robed in his pale violet stole, attended by the sacristan with a small candle. The patient is anointed upon the forehead, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth, the hands, and the feet, with the holy oil of the chrism, while the chaplain murmurs the prayers of the rite. The small cup of the consecrated wine is held to the patient's lips. The patient drinks the small last sip, and the prayers are concluded. The whole rite takes perhaps 10 minutes, and is performed with the quiet attention that long practice brings. The cup is one of the most carefully kept objects of the chapel. It is washed each evening with a small soft cloth, and a little white wine, polished gently with a fine silk, and returned to its locked cabinet. It is one of the great old companions of the place. It has accompanied perhaps several thousand patients on their last passage out of the world. It has been held to the lips of perhaps several thousand mouths in the small last moment of consolation before the long journey. The silver of the cup is gone soft and smooth from the long polishing, and the small chalice gleams in the candle, light with the deep soft warmth of long, loved metal. We have walked in this slow round through the small chapel of the ward, and have met 10 of its quiet objects. Let us turn now to the 6th group, the diet and food vessels of the hospital, kept in the kitchen at the southern end of the building. The 51st is the wooden trencher. Upon the long oak table of the kitchen, stacked in tall neat piles, are the wooden trenchers, the simple flat plates upon which the patients are served their meals. The trencher is a flat round disc of seasoned oak, perhaps 10 inches across, an inch thick, planed flat on top, and slightly hollowed in the center to keep the food from sliding off. It has no rim, no decoration, no carving. It is the simplest of all eating vessels. The wooden trencher is the work of Brother Anselm, the carpenter, the same Brother Anselm who makes the bone setter's splints. He cuts them from straight, grained pieces of seasoned oak, planes them flat, hollows their centers slightly with a small curved scraper, sands them smooth, and stacks them in the kitchen. A trencher, properly made and properly cared for, will last for many years. It is washed in hot water after each meal, set out on a long wooden rack to dry, and returned to its stack. The trenchers come to the bedside of the patients 3 times a day. In the morning, the trencher holds a small portion of oat porridge, perhaps with a small piece of bread beside it. At midday, the trencher holds a small portion of the day's pottage, the slow simmered vegetable stew that is the staple of the hospital diet, perhaps with a small piece of meat or fish for those whose strength can take it. In the evening, the trencher holds a smaller portion of bread and a small piece of cheese. The wood is kindly to the food. It does not chill the broth, does not heat the bread, does not make a small clatter as a metal plate would do. The 52nd is the horn spoon. Stacked beside the trenchers in a small wooden box are the horn spoons. Each is a slender-shaped piece of polished cattle, horn hand, cut from the broad horn, plate, perhaps 6 inches long, with a small shallow bowl at one end and a slender handle at the other. The spoons are the work of a horner of the city, who supplies them to the hospital in batches of 50 at a time. The horn spoon is the standard utensil of the medieval ward. It is light. It is unbreakable. It does not chip. It does not heat the soup or chill the porridge. It does not give a metallic taste to the food. It is easy to clean, easy to replace, easy to carry. The patient holds the spoon in his right hand, draws his food slowly from the trencher, and brings it to his mouth in small, careful measures. For the very weak patients, who cannot lift the spoon to their own mouth, the sister sits at the bedside and feeds the patient herself. With the same horn spoon, the same slow, careful gesture. The feeding of the weakest patients is one of the most patient works of the wards, taking sometimes half an hour for a single small bowl of broth. The sisters do this work without hurry, without complaint, sitting beside the bed in the slow, steady way of those who have done the same work many thousand times before. The 53rd is the earthenware porringer, for the more weakened patients who cannot manage a flat trencher. The kitchen has a stack of small porringers, small round bowls of thick glazed earthenware, perhaps 5 inches across, 2 inches deep, with a small handle on either side. They are the porringers designed to hold the soft soups and the thin gruels of the diet of the very ill. The porringers are made by the potters of the suburb of St. Marceau on the south bank of the river, who supply them to the hospital in batches every few months. The clay is local, the glaze a soft pale amber, yellow, the firing simple. They are not precious, but they are well made, and the round form sits warmly in the hand of the weakest patient. The 2 small handles allow the patient to hold the bowl with both hands, drawing it close to his face, sipping the contents slowly. In the long, quiet evenings of recovery, when the weakest patient at last begins to feel a little stronger, the sister will bring a small porringer of warm broth, half full, with a small horn spoon resting in the bowl. The patient will sit up against his pillow, take the porringer in his thin hands, lift it to his face, and sip the warm broth slowly. The small ceremony of the porringer is one of the small markers of recovery. To be able to hold one's own porringer steady, to bring it to the lips without help, is one of the first small returnings to oneself after a long illness. The 54th is the clay broth pitcher. Upon a low shelf of the kitchen stand the great pitchers of the broth, large round vessels of glazed earthenware, perhaps a foot tall and a foot across, with a wide lip for pouring and a thick handle for the carrying. They are filled in the morning and again in the evening from the great cauldron of the broth, and stand warm upon the shelf, ready to be carried to the wards. The broth in these pitchers is the slow, simmered cooking water of the meats and bones of the kitchen, drawn off from the great cauldron, lightly seasoned with a little salt and a little wild thyme, kept warm against the next round of the wards. It is given to the patients in small horn cups as a between-meal nourishment for the slow recoveries, as a small warming after the morning surgery, as a small hot drink for the patient who has come in cold from the streets and needs to be warmed slowly. The broth pitchers are heavy and are carried by the lay brothers rather than by the sisters, who lift them from the kitchen to the small serving tables set at the heads of the wards. Each pitcher will fill perhaps 30 or 40 horn cups. The broth itself is the slow, steady muscle of the medieval ward, the warming, nourishing, comforting drink that more than any other holds the patients in their slow, steady recovery. The 55th is the oat pottage cauldron. In the center of the kitchen, hung from a great iron hook over the long fire of the kitchen hearth, is the great cauldron of the oat pottage. It is a heavy round vessel of cast iron, perhaps 3 feet across at its lip, and 2.5 feet deep, blackened by long years of fire, holding perhaps 30 gallons of the slow oat pottage, that is the staple breakfast of the hospital. The pottage is begun in the night. The kitchen brother, Brother Henry, rises before the matins bell, lays a fresh fire under the cauldron, fills the cauldron with water from the great kitchen well, adds the great measure of oats from the oat bin, adds a measure of barley for thickening, adds a small measure of dried herbs and a small measure of salt, and lets the whole come slowly to the boil. He stirs it slowly with a long wooden paddle throughout the morning, taking care that the bottom does not burn and the top does not skin. By the time the sisters are ready to serve the morning meal, the pottage has cooked for perhaps 4 hours. It is thick, smooth, fragrant, soft. It is the color of pale cream, with small darker flecks where the herbs have steeped. It is ladled out into the trenchers and the porringers in measured portions, and carried to the long ward in covered trays. The pottage is the simplest of foods. It is the most nourishing of foods. It is the food upon which the recovering patients of the long ward most depend. The 56th is the almond milk pot. Set upon a smaller side hearth of the kitchen is a small copper pot, perhaps a foot tall, containing the almond milk of the diet, made fresh each morning by the kitchen sister for the use of the most delicate patients of the wards. The almond milk is a thick white liquid made by the slow soaking of pounded almonds in hot water, strained through a fine linen cloth and lightly sweetened with honey. The almond milk is given to those patients whose stomachs cannot bear the heavier foods, to those convalescing from a long fever, to children, to the very old, to the dying who can no longer take solid food. It is rich, it is nourishing, it is gentle, it does not curdle in a fevered stomach as cow's milk sometimes does. It is kept warm on the small hearth, stirred occasionally to keep the small grains of almond from settling at the bottom, ladled into small horn cups as needed. The almonds are not cheap. They are imported from the south, from the orchards of Provence and of Catalonia, brought up by the river, trayed in great sacks, kept in a small locked cupboard at the back of the kitchen. The Hôtel-Dieu uses perhaps a sack of almonds a month, which is a considerable expense. But the almond milk is one of the most reliable of all the small medical comforts of the wards, and the master physician will not have it stinted. The 57th is the bread of the convalescent. In the corner of the kitchen, set upon a long wooden table, are the loaves of the convalescent bread, small round soft loaves of fine wheat flour, made by the hospital's own baker in a small bread oven set into the kitchen wall. The bread is finer than the coarse rye, and barley bread served to the strong patients. It is paler, softer, more easily chewed by those whose teeth are bad, more easily digested by those whose stomachs are weak. The bread is made each morning by Brother Etienne, the kitchen brother whose particular care is the bread oven. He mixes the dough in a great wooden trough at the side of the kitchen, lets it rise slowly through the morning, shapes it into small loaves about the size of a man's fist, and bakes them in the small bread oven for perhaps half an hour each. The loaves come out warm and pale gold, with a soft crumb and a thin tender crust. They are wrapped in a clean linen cloth and brought to the wards in the early afternoon, that the slow recovering patients may have a small soft loaf with their evening broth. The convalescent bread is one of the small kindnesses of the kitchen. It is more expensive to make than the coarse bread, and requires more skill, but it is the food upon which a returning appetite first ventures. To watch a long recovering patient take his first small bite of fresh, warm, convalescent bread, after weeks of broth and gruel, is one of the small daily blessings of the sister of the ward. The 58th is the tisane cup. Upon the small table at the head of each ward, at the side of the cathedra, stands a small wooden tray with a row of small earthenware cups, each holding the warm evening tisane that is given to the patients in the hour before sleep. The tisane is the warm herbal infusion of the apothecary, drawn fresh each evening from the dispensary, brought to the ward in a covered jug, poured out into the small cups for the night's dosing. The tisanes change from patient to patient. The patient with the fever has his tisane of willow bark. The patient with the troubled sleep has his tisane of chamomile. The patient with the slow stomach has his tisane of fennel. The patient with the cough has his tisane of hyssop. The night sister, who knows by heart the prescription for each patient, takes up the appropriate cup, brings it to the bedside, helps the patient sit up, holds the cup to his lips, lets him drink slowly, sets the cup back upon the tray. The small ceremony of the evening tisane is one of the great quiet rhythms of the ward. The whole long room takes its evening medicine in a slow, soft chorus. The sister moves from bed to bed with her tray. The patients sit up, drink, lie back. The tisane warms them slowly, the herbs do their gentle work, and the slow drift toward sleep is eased forward by the warm, steady hand of the dispensary. The 59th is the wine of the diet. Upon a small side table of the kitchen stands a small earthenware jug of the wine of the diet, a thin pale wine bought from the hospital's own vineyard in the village of Schuresens outside the city, kept on hand for the medical use of the master physician. The wine is mixed with water before serving, perhaps 3 parts water to 1 part wine, and is given in small horn cups to those patients whose diet calls for a small daily portion of wine. The wine is given for several reasons. It is given to the very weakened patient as a small stimulant to the heart. It is given to those recovering from a great loss of blood, on the medieval theory that the wine helps to rebuild the blood. It is given to those whose appetite has not yet returned, as a small stimulant to the stomach. It is given to the elderly patients of the long ward as a small daily comfort, that they may keep some small thread of the pleasures of the table, even in their long bedridden life. The dose is small, perhaps 2 or 3 ounces of the watered wine, taken with the midday meal. The wine of the diet is mild, light, slightly sour, more refreshing than intoxicating. The hospital's own vineyards have produced wine for the wards for centuries, and the small jugs are part of the slow daily life of the place. The patients who receive their small daily measure look forward to it, and take it with the small grateful pleasure of an old habit kept up. The 60th is the honey jar. Upon the high shelf of the kitchen, near the back wall, stands a great earthenware jar of honey, perhaps 2 feet tall, wide-mouthed, with a heavy wooden lid weighted by a stone. The jar holds the year's supply of honey for the kitchen and the dispensary, perhaps 100 pounds of honey, brought up at the late summer harvest from the hospital's own apiaries in the country to the north. The honey is the sweetener of the medieval pharmacy, used in the making of the syrups, the sweetening of the bitter herbs, the binding of the pill masses. It is also used freely in the kitchen for the sweetening of the convalescent gruels, the spooning over the morning bread of the long recovering, the small drop in the evening tisane. The honey is one of the great steady medicines of the place, gentle to the throat, soothing to the stomach, warming to the long winter convalescent. The honey is gathered each summer by the lay brothers who tend the bees in the hospital's apiaries. There are perhaps 20 hives in the apiary, each producing perhaps 5 pounds of honey in a good summer, brought down to the hospital in great wooden buckets. The honey is the slow, steady gold of the place, carried always in small portions from the great jar to the small dishes of the kitchen and the dispensary, a small spoonful at a time, used for many small purposes throughout the long working day. We have walked, in this slow round, through the kitchen and have met 10 of its quiet vessels. Let us turn now to the 7th group, the cleaning and care implements of the wards, the small humble objects without which no medieval hospital could have endured a single week. The 60. First is the linen sheet. Folded in long careful piles, in the great linen cupboards of the wards, in the press, room of the laundry, in the small chests at the side of every bed, are the linen sheets of the Hôtel-Dieu, the great quiet army of the bed linens. Each sheet is a long rectangle of plain woven linen, perhaps 8 feet by 6, woven on the wide looms of the hospital's own weavers, finished at its edges with a simple hem of fine stitching. The linen is the soft pale cream of unbleached flax, washed many times to softness, faintly fragrant of the lavender and rosemary among which it is stored. The linen sheet is changed from each bed once a week in the ordinary course, more often when the patient's condition requires it. The Hôtel-Dieu has perhaps 1,000 sheets in active rotation, half of them upon the beds, half of them in the laundry process, all of them slowly working their way through the long rotation of use, washing, drying, pressing, folding, and storage. The linen of the wards is one of the small great achievements of the medieval hospital. To keep 1,000 sheets clean, week in and week out, in the days before any modern technology, requires a careful labor, discipline that few institutions of the age could manage. The sisters of the laundry do this work without fuss, without celebration, year after year, and the sheets that come down to the bedside in the evening are reliably clean, reliably soft, reliably sweet smelling. The patient who has come in from the streets of Paris, in his rags and his small confusion, and is laid down upon a clean linen sheet for the first time perhaps in years, sometimes weeps quietly in the small, simple comfort of it. The linen sheet is the most basic kindness of the wards, and it is given to every patient without question. The 62nd is the wash bowl of pewter. Beside each bed, set upon a small wooden stand, stands a small basin of polished pewter, perhaps 8 inches across, 4 inches deep, with a flat bottom and slightly flared sides. It is the wash bowl, the small basin in which the patient's face and hands are washed by the sister in the morning round, and again before the evening meal. The wash bowl is filled by the sister from the great brass ewer of warm water that she carries on her round. She sets the bowl on the small wooden stand by the bed, helps the patient sit up if he can, and washes his face and hands with a small soft cloth dipped in the warm water. The water is changed for each patient, the bowl is rinsed, refilled, and carried to the next bed. The whole round, from the first bed to the last, takes perhaps an hour and a half, and is one of the central works of the morning. The washing of the patient is more than a small hygienic gesture. It is the small ceremony of the morning, the gentle touching of the patient's face with warm water and clean cloth, the small reaffirmation that the patient is still a person, still cared for, still attached by the small thread of the daily bath to the long human community of the well. The patient who has been washed each morning, even when he can do nothing else for himself, is a patient who has not been forgotten. The pewter wash bowls of the Hôtel-Dieu, in their long quiet careers, have witnessed many tens of thousands of these small daily kindnesses. The 63rd is the brass ewer. Carried by the sister upon her morning round is a tall brass ewer, perhaps 18 inches high, with a slender curved spout and a thick handle. It holds perhaps a gallon of warm water, drawn each morning from the great cauldron of warm water that hangs over the kitchen fire, carried up to the wards in the early light. The ewer is the source of the morning wash. From its slender spout, the warm water is poured into the small pewter wash bowls at each bedside. The brass of the ewer is polished to a soft, warm glow by the daily handling. The handle is smooth and well worn. The slender spout pours cleanly without dripping. The ewer holds enough water for perhaps 30 patients, after which it is taken back to the kitchen, refilled, and brought up again. The morning round may require 2 or 3 trips to the kitchen for the refilling, and the lay brothers help the sisters with this carrying. The Hôtel-Dieu has perhaps a dozen such ewers kept in long use, each marked with a small mark on its base by the brass worker who made it. The oldest, marked with the small fleur de lis of the founder André of Tournai, has been in service since the year 1312. Its handle has been attached perhaps 4 times across the years, but the body is sound, the spout still pours cleanly, and it does its work as it has always done. The 64th is the chamber pot. Set beneath each bed, in a small wooden niche cut into the side of the bedstead, is a small clay chamber pot, perhaps 8 inches tall, with a wide flared rim and a thick handle. It is the chamber pot, the small humble vessel into which the patient relieves himself when he cannot rise from his bed. The chamber pots are emptied by the lay brothers in the morning round, before the wash, taken out to the small privy at the eastern end of the building, emptied into the great cesspit, rinsed in cold water at the well of the courtyard, and returned to their place beneath the beds. The work is humble, it is unglamorous, it is essential. It is one of the small daily works without which no ward could function for a single day. The chamber pots are made by the local potters, and they are not precious. They are replaced when they crack. Each is plain, glazed pale brown, simple, unmarked. They sit beneath the beds in their small wooden niches, ready to be lifted out when needed, returned when used. The work of the lay brothers who attend to them is one of the small unsung labors of the place. Brother Pierre and Brother Bernard, the 2 lay brothers whose particular charge is this work, do it without complaint, year after year, and have done it now for many years. Their work, more than perhaps any other single labor, keeps the long ward from becoming a place of sickness rather than a place of healing. The 65th is the straw broom. Standing in a quiet corner at the entrance of each ward is a straw broom, a long handle of seasoned ash with a thick brush of bound rye, straw at one end. The broom is used several times a day to sweep the central aisle of the ward, gathering up the small dust, the small fragments of straw that have escaped the mattress sacks, the small bits of bread and crumb that have fallen from the trenchers, and carrying them out to the small bin at the end of the ward. The broom is wielded by the lay sisters who do the cleaning, sometimes by the senior sisters when they have a quiet hour, sometimes by the lay novices in their first weeks of service. The work of sweeping the ward is gentle, repetitive, almost meditative. To sweep along the aisle in the late morning, after the sick have been settled into their slow recoveries, with the soft afternoon light coming down through the high windows, is a small particular piece. The broom is replaced every few months as the rye straw wears down and is no longer effective. The brushes are made by Brother Anselm, who binds them tightly to the handle with strips of leather. Each brush will last perhaps 4 months, after which it is taken apart, the worn straw cast into the kitchen fire, and a new brush is bound on. The handles are kept for many years, polished smooth by the long handling, slightly darkened by the slow years. The 66th is the lavender water sprinkle. Carried by the senior sister on her morning round is a small bottle of the dispensary's lavender water, a slender flask of dark blue glass with a small cork stopper, perhaps 4 inches tall. The flask holds about half a cup of the precious water, distilled from the lavender of the herb garden in the long warm days of summer. The water is sprinkled lightly upon the linen sheets and pillows of the patients, that the small fresh scent of lavender may enter their slow waking and refresh them. The sprinkling is done with the small wooden brush that hangs at the side of the bottle, dipped into the water and shaken once or twice over the bed before the bottle is restoppered. The sprinkle is generous but not excessive, perhaps half a dozen drops per bed. The smell of lavender lifts faintly from the linen for the next several hours, and is one of the small, steady pleasures of the long ward. The lavender water sprinkle is one of the small luxuries of the place. It costs the dispensary considerable labor to distill. It is not strictly necessary in any medical sense, but it is one of the small kindnesses that mark the Hôtel-Dieu apart from the simpler hospitals of the smaller towns. The patients of the long ward, lying in their beds, breathing in slowly, draw in the small sweet floral note of the lavender among the other smells of the place, and are quietly comforted by it. The sprinkle is the small gift of the dispensary to the long ward, given freely each morning, expected by no one, appreciated by all. The 67th is the lye soap, in a small wooden box in the laundry, set upon a long shelf, are the cakes of lye soap used for the washing of the linen and the cleaning of the tables of the kitchen. The lye soap is a hard cake, perhaps 4 inches square, of pale grey, brown color, made in the small soap house at the back of the laundry by the sister who has charge of the soap making. The soap is made by the slow, careful boiling of wood ashes with rendered fat, the wood ash giving up its strong alkali to the fat in a long, slow simmering, the resulting paste poured into shallow wooden trays, dried, cut into cakes, and stored. The making of the soap takes perhaps 3 days for a single batch, and the soap house produces perhaps 100 cakes a year, sufficient for the needs of the laundry and the kitchen. The lye soap is strong. It cuts through the small soiling of the linens, the small grace of the kitchen tables, the small grime of long use. It must be used carefully, for it is hard upon the skin of those who handle it, and the laundry sisters wear long sleeves and a small linen apron when they are at the wash tubs. But it does its work effectively, and the linens of the Hôtel-Dieu are reliably clean year after year because of the small steady production of the soap house. The 68th is the wooden bucket, standing along the wall of the laundry. In long rows are the wooden buckets of the wash, large round vessels of seasoned oak, perhaps 1.5 feet tall, banded with iron hoops, with thick handles arched across the top. The buckets are used for the carrying of water from the great well of the courtyard to the wash tubs of the laundry, for the carrying of the soiled linens from the wards to the wash house, for the carrying of the clean wet linens out to the drying yard. The buckets are heavy when full, perhaps 30 or 40 pounds, and the work of the laundry sisters who carry them many times each day is hard work. The handles are smooth from long handling. The iron bands are polished to a soft dark grey. The wood is darkened by long water and long use. The buckets are made by the cooper of the city and are replaced as they wear out, perhaps every 10 or 15 years. The bucket is the simplest of all the working tools of the place, but it is one of the most important. Without the buckets, the linens cannot be washed, the patients cannot be bathed, the kitchens cannot be cleaned. The slow, steady rhythm of the laundry, year in and year out, is built upon the slow, steady carrying of the buckets, hundreds of buckets in any given day, perhaps 100,000 buckets in a single year. The work is invisible. The result is the visible cleanliness of the place. The 69th is the wash cloth of carded wool, folded in small piles in the linen cupboards of each ward are the small wash cloths of carded wool, soft pieces of woolen flannel, perhaps 1 foot square, with a simple hemmed edge. They are the cloths used by the sisters in the morning wash of the patients, dipped into the warm water of the pewter basin, gently wiped across the patient's face and hands, rinsed in the basin, used again. The wool of the wash cloth is soft. It does not scratch the tender skin of the patient. It holds the warmth of the water for a long moment, that the wash may be warming as well as cleansing. It dries quickly when wrung out, and may be used many times in the course of a morning round. The cloths are washed each evening with the linens of the day, dried in the morning, returned to the cupboards. The Hôtel-Dieu has perhaps 200 such wash cloths in active use, made by the sisters of the wool, room from the spinnings of the local sheep. The wool is the soft, creamy white of the undyed Cotswold fleece, sometimes lightly tinted by long use. The cloths are simple. They are humble. They are essential. They are part of the small daily ceremony of the morning that helps the patient remember who he is. The 70th is the cake of black soft soap. Beside the lye soap, in a small earthenware jar, is kept the black soft soap, a thick, soft, dark substance of paste-like consistency, used for the cleaning of the wood and the leather of the wards. The black soft soap is made by the same sister who makes the lye soap, but with the addition of more fat and less alkali, producing a softer paste that does not cut as harshly, but lifts the small grime of long use from wooden surfaces and from leather without damaging them. The black soft soap is used for the cleaning of the bedsteads, the floors, the trenchers, the wooden tables of the kitchen, the leather costrals, the leather covers of the registers of the writing room. A small dab of the soft soap upon a damp cloth, rubbed gently in small circles across the wood, lifts the small grime and leaves the wood clean and slightly waxed in feel. The cloth is then rinsed in clean water, the surface wiped down, the wood left to dry. The soft soap is one of the small perpetual implements of the cleaning round. The lay sisters who clean the wards each morning use it freely. The trenchers of the kitchen are wiped down with it. After each meal, the wooden bedsteads are wiped down with it once a week. The slow, gentle care of the wood is one of the small reasons the wood of the Hôtel-Dieu's furniture has lasted for many decades, quiet and clean. In the long working life of the wards, we have walked in this slow round through the implements of the cleaning and care of the wards. Let us turn now to the eighth quiet group, the documents and ledgers of the writing room, the small careful records that hold the institution's memory together. The 71st is the admissions register. Upon a long oak desk in the writing room of the master, set beneath a small high window that looks out toward the courtyard, lies a great open book. It is the admissions register, the book in which is recorded the name, the place of origin, the day of arrival, and the small condition of every patient who has come into the wards. The register is a heavy folio of perhaps 600 pages, bound in dark calf, skin over wooden boards, with two strong brass clasps that hold the book closed when it is not in use. The register is the work of the senior clerk, Brother Robert, a quiet older man of 50 who has held this work for 14 years. He sits at the desk in the early afternoon, after the morning's admissions are done, and writes out the entries in his clear, careful hand. Each entry takes perhaps 2 lines. The name, the village or town of origin, the date, the small phrase describing the condition. Sometimes he adds the name of the relative who brought the patient, sometimes the name of the parish priest who recommended the case. The hand is small, neat, steady, the work of a man who has done this same writing now for some 5,000 mornings. The register holds by this evening perhaps 1,500 entries for the current year, the slow accumulation of the daily life of the place. The earlier registers of years gone by are stored in the small archive at the back of the writing room, on long shelves, in tall leather, bound volumes that go back, with only a few small gaps, to the year 1238. The institutional memory of the Hôtel-Dieu in this slow accumulating archive is one of the most complete in any medieval European hospital. To stand before the shelves of the register, and to know that the names of every patient who has passed through these wards for nearly a century and a half are written in those quiet pages, is to feel something of the long, humble seriousness of the place. The 72nd is the Book of Accounts. Upon a smaller desk at the side of the writing room lies the great Book of Accounts, the day book of the hospital's expenditures and incomes. It is the work of the clerk of accounts, Brother Morris, a careful man of 46 who has held this work for 9 years. The book is bound in plain dark calf skin with a single brass clasp and is divided into columns for the date, the description of the entry, the sum in pence and shillings and pounds, and a small running total at the right margin of each page. The Book of Accounts records every penny that comes into and goes out of the hospital, the bequests from pious citizens, the gifts from the city corporation, the wages of the master physician, the payments to the bakers and the millers and the wine merchants and the linen weavers, the small daily expenses of the kitchen, the cost of the imported spices, the cost of the herbs that are not grown in the garden, the cost of the sick care, the linen, the candles, the firewood, the soap. Every small payment is entered. Every small income is entered. The book is closed at the end of each day, with the small running total at the bottom of the page. And at the end of each year, a great careful audit is performed by the master himself. The book of accounts is the small steady ledger of the long material life of the institution. It is read perhaps once a year by the master in his audit, perhaps once a generation by the visiting bishop in his inspection. For most of the time it sits closed upon its desk, the small silent record of all the careful comings and goings of the small worldly substance of the place. The 73rd is the donor's roll. Upon the wall above the master's desk hangs a long parchment scroll, mounted upon a wooden roller at its top and another at its bottom, perhaps 8 feet long when fully unrolled. It is the donor's roll, the careful list in chronological order of every benefactor who has given a major gift to the hospital across the centuries. The roll begins in the year 936 with the name of the founder Saint Landry of Paris, the bishop who first set aside the small alms house from which the great hospital eventually grew. From there the names descend in the careful hand of generations of clerks. The kings of France who endowed the hospital with revenues, the bishops who bequeathed it lands, the wealthy merchants who left it gifts in their wills, the pilgrims who, at the close of long lives, gave it their houses or their farms or their small precious possessions. Each name is followed by the date of the gift and a small phrase describing the donation. Some entries take up a single line. Some take up half a page, where a great donation required careful description. The roll is, in its slow accumulation, a kind of intimate biography of the hospital, told through the people who have loved it enough to give it something of their substance. The roll is unrolled once a year, on the feast day of the founder, and is read aloud by the master before the assembled sisters and lay brothers of the house, that the names of the benefactors may not be forgotten. The 74th is the list of the lay brothers. Pinned to the wall beside the donor's roll is a smaller parchment, a plain list of the names of all the lay brothers and lay sisters currently in service at the Hôtel-Dieu with their dates of admission and their particular charges. The list is updated whenever a new brother or sister is admitted, or when one is moved to a different work, or when one dies and is removed from the rolls. Currently the list holds perhaps 80 names, of varying lengths of service. The longest serving brother is Brother Gills the candle maker, who has been at the house for 41 years since he was a young man of 23. The newest is a young sister called Marie of Senlis, who was admitted only last month at the age of 19, and is currently learning the work of the morning wash from the senior sister. The list is a small administrative document, but it is also a kind of map of the human community of the place. Each name represents a life, a vocation, a long, slow work in service of the wards. The list will be looked at in the slow, long afternoon of any quiet day by any number of eyes, each searching for a familiar name among the long, careful lines, each tracing the small genealogies of the place. The 75th is the catalogue of the dispensary. Upon a smaller desk at the back of the writing room, near the door that leads down to the dispensary, lies a thick leather, bound volume of perhaps 300 pages. It is the catalogue of the dispensary, the careful inventory of every herb, every powder, every syrup, every ointment, every pill currently held upon the dispensary shelves, with the date of its preparation, the source of its ingredients, the quantity remaining, and the date of expected replenishment. The catalogue is the work of the apothecary, who updates it weekly, walking the dispensary shelves with the book in his hand, checking each albarello and each box and each pot against the entry, noting in the small margin the current quantity and any small marks of changing condition. The catalogue is therefore the small, precise mirror of the dispensary, the working document by which the apothecary knows what he has, what he is running low upon, what he must order, what he must prepare. The catalogue runs to many hundreds of entries. The rarer ingredients have only a single entry each. The commoner herbs have multiple entries, one for each form in which they are kept: dried herb, infusion, syrup, electuary, ointment. The catalogue is the working brain of the dispensary, the thinking through which the slow, steady supply of the medicines is held in regular order, that the morning rounds of the master and the chirurgeon may always find what they need. The 76th is the seal of the master. Upon a small wooden stand on the master's desk lies a small bronze seal, set into a slender ivory handle, with a finely carved emblem on its working face. The emblem is the small fleur de lis of the kings of France quartered with the lily, and the crozier of the bishops of Paris, surrounded by a small Latin inscription that reads, in the language of the Church, Sigillum Magistri Hospitalis Parisiensis, the seal of the master of the Hôtel-Dieu of Paris. The seal is used to authenticate the official documents of the master, the letters to the bishop, the receipts for major donations, the official appointments of new sisters, the formal records of the audit. The seal is impressed into a small dab of warm, dark red sealing wax dropped upon the page, or the folded parchment, the seal pressed firmly into the wax until it cools, and the document then bears the small, clear emblem of the master's authority. The seal of the Hôtel-Dieu has been in use for nearly a century, with only minor refurbishments. It was made in the year 1294 by a goldsmith of the city, of the finest grade of bronze, with the small careful carving of the emblem cut by a skilled hand. The bronze has darkened slowly to a soft dark patina, but the working face has been kept polished by the master's careful daily wiping, and the emblem stamps clearly into the warm wax even now. The seal is one of the small heavy substances of the institution's long continuity. It has been pressed onto perhaps 500,000 documents in its long career. The 77th is the quill and inkwell. Upon the master's desk, set in a small wooden tray, are the working tools of the writing of all these careful documents, the quills and the inkwells of the office. The quills are made from the long flight feathers of geese, gathered from the hospital's own poultry yard each summer, cut down to size, tempered by a small dipping into hot sand, and trimmed at the tip with a sharp knife to give the small chiseled point that holds the ink and releases it cleanly to the page. There are perhaps 20 quills in the tray, each in slightly different stages of use, the finer ones for the careful copying of the formal documents, the coarser ones for the quick, rough notes of the daily round. The inkwell is a small ceramic vessel of dark glaze, perhaps 1.5 inches across, holding about a thimbleful of ink. The ink is made by the apothecary from a recipe of oak, galls boiled in vinegar with a small addition of iron sulfate, producing the deep blue, black ink that is the standard of the medieval European writing trade. The inkwell is refilled from a small, stoppered bottle of the spare ink, kept in the cupboard beside the desk. The quill is the small, careful instrument of the institution's memory. The clerk dips the quill, taps it gently against the rim of the inkwell to remove the excess, brings it down to the page, writes the small, careful line of the entry, returns the quill to its small tray, takes it up again for the next line. The work is slow. The work is precise. The work is the small, steady accretion, line by line, day by day, year by year, of the institutional history of the place. Many quills have done this work. Many quills will do it after. The 78th is the wax for sealing. Upon the master's desk, in a small earthenware jar set beside the inkwell, is kept a small block of dark red sealing wax, perhaps the size of a child's thumb. The wax is made of a careful mixture of beeswax and a deep red mineral pigment, producing the warm dark red that is the standard of the medieval seals. To seal a document, the master takes up the small block, holds one end over the small candle that burns upon his desk, lets a small dab of wax drip onto the page or the folded parchment, presses his bronze seal into the dab while it is still warm, and lifts the seal away. The wax cools quickly to a hard, dark red disc bearing the impression of the seal. The document is then folded, dispatched, kept on file, or sent on its way as the case requires. The wax in the jar is replenished from time to time by the apothecary, who makes the wax in small batches when the supply runs low. The making of the wax is a small, steady work of the dispensary, performed perhaps twice a year, when a fresh block is mixed and cooled and cut into smaller cakes for the use of the master. The block currently in the jar was made in the early spring of this year and will last perhaps another 6 months at the present rate of use. The 79th is the almsgiving box. Upon a small wooden stand at the entrance to the writing room, set against the wall, where it can be seen by anyone passing along the corridor, stands the almsgiving box, a small, heavy iron, bound wooden box with a thin slot in its top. The box is fastened to its stand with a heavy iron chain, and the lid is sealed with a strong iron lock to which only the master holds the key. The box is the receptacle for the small daily alms that are given by the visitors and the relatives who come to the hospital to see their sick. A small coin dropped through the slot becomes part of the small daily contributions of the place. The box is opened once a month in the master's office by the master and the clerk of accounts together, the contents counted, recorded in the book of accounts, and added to the running treasury of the institution. The box is small, but the slow accumulation of small alms across a month is not. A monthly count yields perhaps 2 or 3 pounds in coin, which is no small sum. Across a year the box yields perhaps 30 pounds, sufficient to cover a substantial part of the cost of the firewood for the kitchen, or the wages of 1 or 2 of the lay brothers. The almsgiving box is one of the small, steady sources of the institution's revenue, gathered patiently coin by coin from the small generosity of the visitors who pass through the place. The 80th is the notarial copy of the bequest, folded carefully and laid in a small leather portfolio at the back of the master's desk is the most recent notarial copy of a bequest, the official sealed document by which a wealthy benefactor has left a sum of money or a piece of property to the hospital in his last will. The current bequest is from a mercer of the city, Master Henry of Senlis, who died last month at the age of 68, and who has left to the Hôtel-Dieu the sum of £120 in coin and a small house on the Rue de la Paix. The notarial copy is the work of the city notary, the official lawyer of the city, who holds the proper authority to authenticate such documents. It is written in fine, careful Latin upon a single large sheet of parchment, with the careful description of the bequest, the names of the witnesses, and the seals of the testator, and the notary affixed at the bottom. The document is folded in the standard form, tied with a small ribbon, and sealed with a final dab of wax bearing the city's seal. The bequest will be carefully entered into the donor's roll in the proper place, and the small house and the sum of money will be added to the institution's holdings. The work of administering the bequest, of taking possession of the small house, of collecting the money from the testator's heirs, of finding a proper use for the property, falls to the master, who will give it his quiet attention in the next few weeks. The bequest is one of the small, steady streams of substance that has kept the hospital alive across its long centuries, and the master receives it with the small, careful gratitude that long practice has trained into him. We have walked, in this slow round, through the writing room of the master, and have met 10 of its quiet, careful documents. Let us turn now to the 9th quiet group, the small personal items left behind by the patients who have come and stayed in the wards, the small precious things of the long stayers and the dying, kept in a small wooden chest at the head of each bed. The 80. First is the plain silver ring of a wife. In the small wooden chest at the head of one of the beds in the women's ward lies a plain silver ring. It is a thin band of polished silver, no thicker than a strand of wool, smooth, unmarked, with a small worn line running around its inner side, where it has rested upon the finger of its wearer for many decades. The ring belonged to the woman in the bed, an old widow named Madeleine of Argenteuil, now 73 years old, who has been at the Hôtel-Dieu for the past 7 months in her long final illness. The ring was given to Madeleine by her husband Pierre on the day of their wedding in the parish church of Saint Eustache in the year 1326, when she was a young woman of 19 and he was a young man of 24. They lived together for 43 years, raised 4 children, lost 2 of them in childhood, kept a small bakery on the Rue Saint-Honoré, and grew old together. Pierre died 11 years ago. Madeleine wore the ring without taking it off for 11 more years, until her hands grew so thin from her illness that the ring no longer held to her finger. She gave it to the sister of the night watch with a small request that it be kept in her chest until her death, when it should be sent to her surviving daughter, Anne of Argenteuil, who lives in the village outside the city. The ring sits in the chest in the dark, a small thin circle of silver, holding within it the faint warmth of a marriage of 43 years and the long widowhood of 11 more. It is, perhaps, the smallest object in the whole of the hospital tonight, but it carries within it one of the longest stories. The 82nd is the set of Paternoster prayer beads. In the chest of another bed lies a string of small wooden prayer beads, perhaps 50 of them, strung upon a slender cord of dark linen, with a small carved wooden cross at one end. The beads are of dark walnut, polished smooth by many years of handling, each about the size of a small pea. They are the Paternoster, the medieval rosary, the small string of beads upon which the believer counts out his 100 prayers in the slow daily devotion. The beads belong to an old man in the bed, a former soldier named Jacques of Biarx, now 68, who has been at the hospital for 3 months with a slow consumption of the lungs. The beads were given to him by his mother on the day he set off for his first campaign as a young man of 19, 50 years ago, with the instruction that he was to say his prayers each evening upon them, and so be kept safe. He has carried them ever since, through the long wars in the south, through the years of his marriage, through the years of his work as a saddler in the city, through the long widowhood of his old age. The beads sit in the chest at the head of his bed, taken out each evening when he says his prayers, returned each night when he sleeps. The wood has darkened almost to black in the long handling, and the small individual beads carry the soft polish of 50,000 evenings of slow, careful counting. Jax will, in the slow course of his illness, take them out fewer and fewer times in the week. By the end he will hold them only on the days when his strength permits. But they will be at the head of his bed when the time comes, and the sister of the death room will press them into his slowly cooling hand at the appropriate moment. The 83rd is the folded letter from a son. In the chest of another bed lies a small folded sheet of paper, perhaps 4 inches by 6, much creased and softened by many openings. It is a letter written from the city of Bruges in Flanders, where the writer is a young merchant of 28, addressed to his old father in the bed, an old wool merchant named Etienne of Lille, now 69, who has been at the hospital for 2 months in his last illness. The letter is in the careful hand of the young man, written 6 weeks ago, telling his father that he has heard of his illness, that he prays for his recovery, that he hopes to come to Paris before the year is out, that his wife is well and his small children well, that the wool trade has been good this year. The letter is signed simply, "Your loving son, Henry." The letter was carried south by a merchant returning from Flanders, brought to the hospital by a city porter, delivered to Etienne's bedside on a Wednesday afternoon when he was still strong enough to read it himself. Etienne keeps the letter in his chest. He takes it out perhaps once a day, opens it carefully, reads through it again, refolds it, returns it to the chest. The paper has grown soft at its folds. The ink has not faded. The letter is the small thread between the bed in the long ward and the small house in the city of Bruges where the young man and his family go about their lives. When Etienne dies, in another 2 weeks or so, the letter will be returned to Henry, with a small, careful note from the master telling him of his father's quiet end. The 84th is the small purse of 2 silver pennies. In the chest of another bed lies a small leather purse, perhaps the size of a large walnut, with a drawstring of plain leather. Within the purse are 2 silver pennies, English coins of the realm of King Edward III, struck about 30 years ago, slightly worn at their edges, still bearing the king's bearded face on one side and the long cross on the other. The pennies belong to an old pilgrim in the bed, a man named Thomas of York, now 61, who travelled to Paris in the late summer to visit the Cathedral of Notre Dame and the relics of Saint Denis at the great abbey north of the city. He fell ill upon his arrival, was brought to the hospital by the parish priest, who found him stumbling in the street, and has been at the bed now for some 6 weeks. Thomas has lain in his bed slowly recovering, slowly fading. The 2 pennies in his purse are all the money he has remaining of the small sum he set out with from England. They are the small ransom of his journey home, if he should recover. They are the small offering for his burial, if he should not. He will not be allowed to use them either way. The hospital will not take them. The pennies are returned to him each time the master makes his rounds, slipped quietly back into his chest. They will, in the event of his death, be sent home to his parish in Yorkshire, with a small note explaining what has come to pass, that his small estate may be settled. The 85th is the pilgrim's cockle shell of Santiago. In the chest of another bed lies a small white cockle shell, the size of the palm of a hand, fan-shaped, with a small hole drilled through its narrow end, and a piece of thin leather thong threaded through the hole. It is the shell of Santiago, the badge of the pilgrim who has made the long journey to the shrine of St. James the Greater at the great Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in the far western corner of Spain. The shell belongs to an old peasant from Bourgogne in the bed, a man named Guillaume of M. Con, now 59, who made the long pilgrimage to Santiago in his 38th year, walking south from his small village across the long road of the Pyrenees and through the high country of Castile and Galicia, returning by the same road many months later. He has worn the shell on a leather thong around his neck for the 20 years since, in fulfillment of his pilgrim's vow. Guillaume is in the hospital now in his last illness. He has not, all these years, taken the shell from around his neck. The sister of the night watch has slipped it gently from him only this past evening, that he might be more comfortable, and has placed it carefully in the chest at his side, with his other small possessions. He will, perhaps, ask for it back tomorrow, and the sister will return it to him. He will keep it close to him, in his thin hand, through whatever remains of his long quiet pilgrimage. The 86th is the wooden comb of bone. In the chest of one of the beds in the women's ward lies a small wooden comb, perhaps 4 inches long, with 2 rows of fine teeth set into a flat wooden body. The teeth on one side are slender and close together for the fine combing of the hair. The teeth on the other side are stouter and farther apart, for the rougher work of disentangling. The comb is made of polished cherry wood, with the teeth cut by a craftsman of the city in the patient, careful way that bone comb makers have used for centuries. The comb belongs to a young woman in the bed, a serving maid from the household of a Parisian merchant named Jeanne of Choisy, now 22, who has been at the hospital for the past 3 weeks recovering from a long fever that nearly took her life. The comb was given to her by her mother on the day she left the village to come to her work in the city 6 years ago. Her mother told her that she should keep her hair clean and tidy, and that this was a small thing that would mark her apart in the city from the small unkempt women of the street. Janine has used the comb every day of those 6 years, and has used it every day she has been strong enough in the hospital after the morning wash. The comb has grown polished from her use. The teeth are smooth from the long passing through her dark hair. The comb is one of the small things by which she remains herself in the strange place of the long ward. As her recovery slowly moves forward, she will combine more and more of the small habits of her former self around her, and the comb is one of the first small returns. The 87th is the folded handkerchief of plain linen. In the chest of another bed lies a small folded handkerchief of plain linen, perhaps 8 inches square, with a simple hemmed edge and a small embroidered initial in one corner. The initial is a careful M, worked in pale blue silk thread, the work of an unknown hand many years ago. The handkerchief belongs to an elderly woman in the bed, a long stayer named Margaret of Senlis, now 76, who has been at the hospital for nearly 4 years in her long, quiet old age. The handkerchief was given to Margaret by a friend, a woman named Marie of Senlis, who is long dead, in the year 1362, when both women were in their middle years and Marie was about to leave the city to live with her son in the country. The friendship was a long one, of perhaps 20 years standing. The handkerchief was a parting gift with the embroidered initial of Marie's own first name, that Margaret might remember her friend. Margaret has carried the handkerchief for 18 years. She has used it perhaps 1,000 times. It is soft from many washings. The embroidered initial slightly faded, the small linen square almost translucent. It sits in her chest in the long, quiet hours of her bed, bound days, taken out occasionally to wipe a small tear from her eye, when the loneliness of the long evenings comes upon her. The handkerchief is a small monument to a long friendship, now mostly memory. It will be in her hand when she dies, perhaps next year, perhaps the year after. The 88th is the small tin pilgrim's badge of Notre Dame. In the chest of another bed lies a small flat tin badge, perhaps the size of a small coin, bearing the small stamped image of the Virgin and Child on its face, and the inscription Notre Dame de Paris around its rim. It is a pilgrim's badge, the small souvenir bought by visitors to the cathedral, sold at a small stall outside the great west doors for a few pennies, worn on the cloak by those who wish to mark themselves as pilgrims to the great shrine. The badge belongs to a man in the bed, a Flemish weaver named Pieter of Wieprez, now 51, who has been at the hospital for the past 2 months, recovering from a complicated wound to his leg that he received in a fall from the stage of a building in the city. The badge was bought by him on his arrival in Paris 3 months ago, before the accident, when he made his first visit to the cathedral. He had pinned it to his cloak as a small token of his respect for the place, and it had been on his cloak when the fall came. The cloak was hung in the small clothes cupboard of his ward, and the badge has been in his chest ever since. Peter takes it out from time to time and turns it in his fingers. He has been told by the master that he will recover, that the leg will mend, that he will walk again, that he will go home to Ypres before the year is out. The small badge is therefore not a memorial of a lost journey, but a marker of a journey that will continue after a long, quiet pause, when his leg has finished its slow mending. The 89th is the folded prayer for a safe passage. In the chest of another bed lies a small folded sheet of parchment, perhaps 3 inches square, much worn at its edges. Upon it is written, in small, careful Latin, a brief prayer for a safe passage of the soul through the dangers of the journey from this life to the next. The parchment is signed at the bottom by a parish priest who has written and blessed the prayer at the request of the patient. The prayer belongs to an old woman in the bed, a widow named Catherine of St. Denis, now 81, who has been at the hospital for the past 5 months in her last quiet illness. The prayer was written for her at her own request by the priest of the chapel of St. Denis in the abbey north of the city, where she had been a faithful parishioner for the last 40 years of her life. She had asked him to write it out for her in the slow weeks before she came to the hospital, that she might have it with her in her last days. Catherine takes the prayer out of her chest each evening, holds it for a few moments in her thin hands, returns it to its place. She does not now read it. Her eyesight has grown too dim, but she knows the words by heart, having said them in the small quiet of her bed every evening of these last months. The folded parchment is the small, visible token of her preparation for the journey. When she dies, perhaps next week, perhaps the week after, the parchment will be folded once more and placed gently within the linen of her winding sheet. The 90th is the wooden walking staff. Leaning against the wall beside another bed stands a long wooden walking staff, perhaps 5 feet tall, of seasoned ash, with a smooth knob at the top and a small iron tip at the bottom. The wood is polished by many years of handling, the knob worn slightly flat where it has been gripped, the iron tip slightly bent, where it has tapped against many cobblestones. The staff belongs to an old shepherd in the bed, a man named Bernard of Picardy, now 63, who has been at the hospital for the past 4 weeks recovering from a slow chest cold that he caught while traveling south to find his daughter in the city. The staff was made by Bernard himself from a young ash tree on his small farm in Picardy, perhaps 20 years ago. He had cut the tree, peeled the bark, smoothed the wood with a small spokeshave, fitted the iron tip, and used the staff for the next 20 years on the long roads of his shepherd's life. The staff stands beside the bed, leaning quietly against the stone of the wall. Bernard cannot yet walk, but he expects to walk again. The master has told him that he will recover, that the cough will ease, that the chest will clear. He will take up the staff again, perhaps in another 2 weeks, perhaps in another 3. He will walk back out of the city to his daughter's small house in the suburb, and from there back home to his farm with the staff in his hand. The staff is therefore not a memorial but a promise. It is the small visible token of the journey that has been temporarily set aside. We have walked, in this slow round, through the small personal items of 10 of the long stairs of the wards. Let us turn now, gently, to the last quiet group, the items of the small bare death, room set aside at the corner of the building, where the dying are brought in their last days for the small, careful comforts of the end. The 91st is the winding sheet, folded in long, careful piles in the cupboard of the death room are the winding sheets, the long, plain rectangles of unbleached linen in which the bodies of the dead are wrapped before they are taken to the burial. Each sheet is perhaps 8 feet by 4, a single piece of plain woven linen, finished at its edges with a simple hem. The linen is the same as that of the bed linens of the wards, only longer. The winding sheet is laid out beneath the body of the deceased in the death room. The body washed and prepared, the body wrapped carefully in the sheet with the head covered and the feet covered, the loose ends bound with a few simple ties of plain linen tape. The wrapping is the work of the death room sister, who performs the slow, careful task with the long, quiet attention of one who has done it many times. The Hôtel-Dieu has perhaps 50 winding sheets in active rotation, made by the linen weavers of the hospital. They are stored in long, flat piles in the cupboard. They are taken out as needed, used once, and not returned. Each sheet, after a single use, is buried with the body it has wrapped. The pile in the cupboard is replenished from time to time as the supply runs low. The sister of the death room knows the count of the sheets in the cupboard and reports the count to the linen room each month, that the supply may be kept steady. The 92nd is the plain pine board. Standing in the corner of the death room, leaning against the wall, are several plain pine boards, perhaps 6.5 feet long, 2 feet wide, an inch thick. They are the boards upon which the bodies of the deceased are laid for the carrying out of the death room to the small mortuary chapel by the cemetery, and from there to the grave. The boards are simple. They are unfinished. They have a single iron handle at each end for the carrying. The boards are the work of Brother Anselm the carpenter, who keeps a small stock of them ready in his workshop and sends fresh boards down to the death room as the supply diminishes. Each board is used many times before it must be replaced. The wood is wiped clean with a damp cloth after each use, and the board is set against the wall until it is needed again. The body of the deceased, wrapped in its winding sheet, is laid carefully upon the board. The 2 lay brothers who do this work, Brother Pierre and Brother Bernard, lift the board between them, one at the head and one at the feet, and carry the body slowly through the long ward to the small side door that opens out to the cemetery courtyard. The other patients of the long ward, lying in their beds, watch the small slow procession in respectful silence. The board passes through the doorway into the courtyard, across to the small mortuary chapel, where the priest will say the brief office of the dead, and then on to the small fresh grave that has been prepared. The 93rd is the death candle of pure wax, set upon a small wooden stand at the head of the body in the death room is a single tall candle of pure beeswax, perhaps 18 inches tall and inch thick, fitted into a slender brass candlestick. It is the death candle, the small light that burns beside the body of the deceased through the slow hours between the moment of death and the carrying out to the grave. The death candle is lit by the death room sister at the moment of death from the small flame of her own working candle. It burns for as long as the body remains in the room, perhaps 4 hours, perhaps 8, perhaps 12. It is a small, steady, warm light beside the still pale face of the deceased, the small, quiet attendant of the long passage. The light is not for any particular liturgical purpose. It is the small companion of the dead. The death candles are made by Brother Gills the candle maker, who pours them in the candle room with the same slow care as the candles of the chapel. Each death candle, used once, is allowed to burn down to its end and is not refurbished. A new candle is set into the candlestick for the next use. The candlestick itself, of polished brass, is wiped clean after each use and stands ready for the next death. The 94th is the asperger of holy water, hanging from a small hook on the wall of the death room is the asperger, a small wooden, handled brush used by the priest in the sprinkling of holy water at the body of the deceased. The asperger is perhaps a foot long in total, with a wooden handle of polished oak at one end, and a thick brush of carded wool wrapped tightly around the other end with a fine wire. The priest takes up the asperger, dips its brush into the small bowl of holy water that he has brought to the death room, and sprinkles the water gently over the body of the deceased while reciting the brief Latin prayer that begins Aspergis me, Domine hysopo et mundaba, sprinkle me, Lord, with hyssop, and I shall be made clean. The drops of water fall lightly upon the winding sheet, the small ritual gesture of the church's blessing extending now to the body that is no longer breathing. The asperger is one of the small, quiet implements of the death room. It is used perhaps 100 times a year, at every death of a Christian patient in the wards. It is replaced from time to time as the wool of the brush wears out, the new brush wrapped tightly in fresh wool by the sacristan, the wooden handle kept and reused. The simple gesture, dipping the brush, sprinkling the water, repeating the prayer, has been performed in this room, with these small instruments, for many decades, by many different priests, over many thousand bodies. The 95th is the small bunch of dried hyssop, set in a small clay jar in the corner of the death room is a bunch of dried hyssop, the slender stalks bound together with a simple wrapping of plain twine, perhaps a dozen stalks in all. The hyssop is the herb of the aspergers, the herb named in the Psalm of the King David, used since ancient times in the small ritual purifications of the church. The bunch of hyssop is a small symbolic accompaniment to the asperger. The asperger is the working tool, the brush that does the actual sprinkling. The bunch of hyssop, in its clay jar, is the small reminder of the ancient origin of the rite, the small physical token of the herb of the psalm. The priest does not generally use the hyssop itself for the sprinkling, but its presence in the room is part of the small completeness of the ritual setting. The hyssop is renewed each summer when the New Year's herbs are dried, the old bunch removed from the jar and burned with a small prayer on the kitchen fire, the new bunch set in its place. The clay jar has stood in the corner of the room for many years, receiving its annual replacement of the herb. The slow continuity of the small ritual setting, year after year, is one of the quiet, steady things of the place. The 96th is the censer of the deathbed, set on a small shelf above the head of the bed in the death room is a small censer, similar to the censer of the chapel but smaller, perhaps 4 inches in diameter. It is the death room censer, used for the small censing of the body before the carrying out, the small offering of incense at the moment of the priest's blessing. The censer is set upon a small ceramic dish in the center of the censer, filled with a small live coal from the kitchen fire and a small grain of incense. The priest takes up the censer by its small chain, swings it gently 3 times over the body of the deceased, lets the small clouds of fragrant white smoke rise up to mingle with the slow air of the room. The incense is the same frankincense and myrrh as is used in the chapel, the resinous gums of the Levant. The smoke of the death room censer drifts slowly upward through the small high window, out into the air of the cemetery courtyard, dispersing slowly into the evening sky. The small smoke is the small upward gesture of the soul's release. It is the visible companion of the prayers of the priest, rising slowly with them. The censer itself is wiped clean after each use and returned to its small shelf. The 97th is the small clay lamp of the watch, set on a low ledge by the door of the death room is a small clay lamp, no larger than an apple, with a small wick floating in a pool of olive oil. It is the lamp of the watch, the small light by which the death room sister keeps her vigil through the night when a body is awaiting the morning's burial. The lamp is filled with olive oil from a small flask kept in the cupboard. The wick is trimmed at intervals through the night by the sister who keeps the watch. The small flame burns slowly and steadily, casting a soft yellow glow through the small bare room. The light is not bright. The light is enough. The sister sits upon a small wooden stool by the bed, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes resting upon the still form beneath the wending sheet, her small, slow prayers passing through her lips in the long, slow hours. The watch is the small, final companionship offered to the dead. The Hôtel-Dieu does not leave its dead alone. The death room sister is present from the moment of death through to the morning, when the body will be lifted onto the pine board and carried out. The lamp is the small visible token of her presence. As long as the lamp burns, the sister is at her watch. As long as the sister is at her watch, the dead are not alone. The 98th is the thurible of the requiem, set against the wall of the small mortuary chapel that stands at the edge of the cemetery courtyard, where the body is brought from the death room for the brief office of the dead, is a thurible, a larger and more elaborate censer than that of the death room itself, with a finer chain and a deeper bowl. It is used by the priest in the slow, careful incensing of the body during the Requiem Mass. The thurible is taken up from its stand at the appointed moment of the rite, filled with fresh incense and a fresh coal, swung in the slow, careful figure 8 pattern that the medieval rubrics prescribe, lowered, taken up again, swung once more. The smoke rises in long pale clouds about the body, mingling with the small smoke of the candles, drifting slowly out through the small high windows of the chapel into the open air above the cemetery. The thurible of the Hôtel-Dieu is a fine old piece of work, made in the bell foundry of the city of Tours in the year 1319, of polished brass with small decorative cutting around its sides. It has been used for nearly 1,000 requiem masses across its long career, each mass for a different patient who has come to his end in the wards of the hospital. Each mass the small ceremonial farewell offered by the institution to one of its long cared for souls. The brass has darkened with the slow accumulation of many incense smokes, but it gleams still in the light of the chapel candles, the small worn but beloved companion of the death room sisters and of the chaplain who has presided here for so many years. The 99th is the bell of the carrying out, set in a small belfry above the small mortuary chapel. On a slender wooden frame is a single small bronze bell, perhaps 6 inches across, with a slender rope hanging down from its clapper. It is the bell of the carrying out, the small bell that is rung at the moment when the body is borne from the chapel to its grave in the small cemetery just beyond the wall. The bell is rung slowly, in single strokes, perhaps 30 in all, while the small slow procession carries the body from the chapel doorway across the courtyard to the open grave. The strokes are not hurried. The strokes are spaced widely. The small bronze voice carries clearly across the courtyard, into the open windows of the wards, into the small streets beyond the hospital wall, where any passing citizen who hears it will pause for a moment, make the small sign of the cross, and offer a brief silent prayer for the soul of the unknown dead. The bell of the carrying out is one of the small slow voices of the medieval city, the small acoustic announcement that another soul has gone. It rings, on average, perhaps 3 times a week in the working life of the hospital. It is the small steady punctuation of the long human passage. It is rung by the sacristan, who pulls the rope with her own hand, slowly, evenly. With the long careful attention that the act demands, The 100th is the wooden cross laid upon the breast, in a small wooden box set on a shelf in the death room are a number of plain wooden crosses, perhaps 6 inches tall, made of dark walnut, with a small carved figure of the crucified Christ upon their faces. They are the crosses laid upon the breasts of the dead before they are wrapped in their winding sheets, the small final visual sign of the patient's faith and of the Church's care. Each cross is laid by the death room sister upon the breast of the body before the wrapping. The body is washed. The hands are folded across the breast. The cross is set upon the folded hands. The winding sheet is then drawn carefully over the body, and the cross is wrapped within the linen, becoming a small inner companion of the body in its long sleep beneath the soil. The cross is not retrieved. It is buried with the body. The crosses are made by Brother Anselm the carpenter, who carves them in his small workshop in the courtyard at his quiet times. He uses pieces of dark walnut left over from larger projects, planes them, cuts them to the proper shape, carves the small figure of the Christ with a careful chisel, sands them, and stacks them in the box in the death room. He has carved perhaps 1,000 of these crosses in his many years at the hospital. He will carve perhaps 1,000 more before he himself is laid to rest beneath one of them. The wooden cross is therefore the last of the 100 items, the small final companion that goes with the patient out of the wards and into the slow eternal soil of the cemetery beyond the wall. It is the small last token of the long careful work of the hospital. The body, wrapped in the linen of the wards, accompanied by the cross of the carpenter's quiet hand, lowered into the small grave by the lay brothers, blessed by the priest with the holy water and the incense, accompanied to its rest by the slow voice of the bell, is at last received by the soil, and the long round of the wards continues for those who remain. We have, in this slow round, walked through 100 items of the medieval hospital. We have begun with the ward and the bed, moved out through the chirurgeon's tools and the apothecary's jars, through the herbs of the dispensary and the holy objects of the chapel, through the food vessels of the kitchen and the cleaning implements of the laundry, through the documents of the writing room and the small possessions of the long stayers, and at the end through the small careful items of the death room and the burial. We have, in our quiet way, walked through the whole life of the place, from the first comfort of the laid out straw mattress to the small last cross laid upon the breast. Now let us let the place quiet itself for the night. The night sister has finished her rounds. She has trimmed the wicks of the candles upon the iron stands. She has refilled the small bowls of warm water that are set at intervals along the central aisle. She has checked, at each bedside, that the patient is breathing easily, that the linen is clean, that the small dose of evening tisane has been taken. She has paused briefly at the bedside of the elderly Madeleine of Argenteuil in the women's ward, has touched her thin hand gently, and has heard the slow, even breathing of her quiet sleep. She has paused at the bedside of the old soldier Jacques of Biax, who is awake, and they have exchanged a few quiet words about his prayers, and she has gone on. She has paused at the bedside of the young Jeanne of Choisy, who is now sound asleep with her hair carefully combed, and has tucked the edge of her wool blanket back under her shoulder. She has come now to the Master's cathedra at the center of the hall, and has set her small lamp upon the reading desk beside it. She sits down upon the low stool at the foot of the cathedra, takes up her own small worn paternoster of dark wood, and begins to count out her evening prayers in the soft quiet of the long hall. The chapel candle burns slowly upon the altar. The small flame is steady. The crucifix above the doorway watches in its slow, patient way. The painted altarpiece glows softly, with its small touches of gold leaf catching the candle light. The long ward sleeps. 200 patients lie in their beds upon the soft straw and the soft wool of their mattresses, beneath their linen sheets and their woolen blankets, breathing slowly in the long, uneven rhythm of human sleep. Some snore softly, some murmur, some shift slightly in their dreams. The small sounds rise into the upper reaches of the vaulted ceiling, mingling with the soft sound of the river. Outside the eastern wall, the slow steady tick of the great wall clock, the small distant bell of a parish church, somewhere across the dark city, sounding the hour. It is a deep and quiet peace. It is the small particular peace of a medieval hospital at the deep middle of a summer's night, in the year 1380, in the long shadow of the Cathedral of Notre Dame, on the small island in the middle of the river that runs through the great city of Paris. It is the peace that has settled here. Every night for many centuries, it is the peace that will settle here many centuries more. The night sister at her quiet prayers does not look up. She has done this work before, on this stool, in this hall. On many evenings of her long service, she knows the slow rhythm of the night ahead of her. She knows the small, careful watches she will keep. She knows the small daily round of the morning that will come. For us, walking with her in spirit through this long, quiet round, it is enough to know that the work has been done, that the patients are settled, that the hall is at its peace. The candles burn slowly down. The chapel taper holds its small, steady flame. The small bells of the city continue to ring the hours, fainter and fainter as the night deepens, until they pass beyond the threshold of hearing. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath slow. Let the small ceiling of your own room come close around you in the soft, warm dark. There is nothing here that asks anything of you. There is nothing more to count, nothing more to remember, nothing more to be. The night sister bends her head over her paternoster. The small, careful work of her prayers continues. The hospital sleeps around her. The river runs past the eastern wall, its slow black water carrying the quiet of the city onward to the sea. The chapel candle holds its small flame steady upon the altar. The world, for this small, slow hour, holds itself perfectly still. Sleep well, rest well. The quiet apothecary will be here when you wake.